Staff Sergeant Maya Reeves stared through her Leopold scope as 15 Navy SEAL operators fought desperately for their lives against 6'5" enemy combatants in the rugged mountains of the Hindu Kush. At 31 years old, with jet black hair pulled tight in a regulation bun and piercing green eyes that had seen too much combat, she was positioned on a rocky outcrop 6 kilometers from the firefight. Her orders were crystal clear: observe and report only. Do not engage under any circumstances. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But as she listened to Lieutenant Commander David Cross's increasingly frantic radio transmissions, hearing the staccato bursts of gunfire punctuated by screams for ammunition and casualty reports that kept climbing, Maya made a decision that would either end her military career or cement her legacy as one of the greatest combat snipers in modern warfare. She grabbed her Knight's Armament SR-25 Enhanced Combat Carbine, verified her load of 220 rounds of 7.62mm NATO ammunition across 11 magazines, and began her descent from the observation post toward the sound of dying men. She knew exactly what she was doing: disobeying a direct order, violating mission parameters, potentially facing court-martial, dishonorable discharge, and the end of everything she'd worked 15 years to build. But none of that mattered as much as the voices crackling through her earpiece. American voices. Warriors' voices, men who had minutes, not hours, before they were overrun and killed to the last man in a nameless valley that would become their unmarked grave. The Hindu Kush stretched endlessly before her, a brutal landscape of jagged peaks, deep ravines, and treacherous scree fields that could snap an ankle or send a soldier tumbling hundreds of feet to their death. The mountains were painted in shades of gray and brown, with patches of struggling vegetation clinging to impossible slopes. At 8,000 feet elevation, the thin air burned in her lungs with every breath. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, creating heat shimmer that would complicate her shooting calculations, while shadows from the peaks created pockets of darkness that could hide entire squads of enemy fighters. Maya had been in country for 8 months, attached to Joint Special Operations Command as part of a specialized sniper reconnaissance element. Her official role was high-altitude overwatch and intelligence gathering. She was the eye in the sky, the silent observer who watched operations unfold and reported back to tactical operations centers where colonels and generals moved pieces on maps and made decisions about American lives from air-conditioned rooms 500 miles away. But right now, in this moment, Maya wasn't thinking about her official role or the chain of command or the carefully constructed rules of engagement that governed modern warfare. She was thinking about 15 men, 15 husbands, fathers, sons, and brothers who were about to die because intelligence had failed them, because support was too far away, and because someone at headquarters had decided that violating operational security by inserting additional assets was more dangerous than letting those men fight alone. The firefight had been raging for nearly 4 hours. 4 hours of sustained combat at close quarters against an enemy force that had every advantage: superior numbers, prepared positions, intimate knowledge of the terrain, and an endless supply of ammunition and reinforcements flowing down from caves and compounds further up the valley. The SEALs had walked into a trap so perfectly constructed, it could only have been based on leaked intelligence or catastrophic operational security failure. Through her scope, even from 6 kilometers away, Maya could see the muzzle flashes lighting up the mountainside like a deadly lightning storm. The SEAL's position was marked by the distinctive sharp cracks of M4 carbines and the slower, heavier thumps of M240 machine guns controlled disciplined fire from men who knew every bullet counted. The enemy fire was different. the ragged chatter of AK-47s, the sustained bursts of PKM machine guns, and the distinctive crump of RPG launches that sent rockets streaking across the valley trailing white smoke. The tactical picture was painted in sound and fury. Maya's trained ear could distinguish between weapon systems, could estimate rates of fire, could hear the desperation building as the SEAL fire became more sporadic, more conservative. They were running out of ammunition. The situation reports confirmed what her instincts already knew. "Talk, this is Vanguard Actual." Lieutenant Commander Cross's voice cut through the static, strained but controlled. "We are taking effective fire from elevated positions on 3 sides. 4 casualties, 2 urgent surgical. Ammunition at 30%. Enemy force estimated 65 to 70 fighters with crew-served weapons. Request immediate close air support and emergency extraction." "How copy?" The response from the Tactical Operations Center came back cold and bureaucratic. "Vanguard Actual. Talk copies your situation. Fast movers are 45 minutes out due to air traffic deconfliction. Ground QRF is 50 minutes from your position due to terrain. Kasivak birds are spinning up but cannot insert until area is secure. Continue to defend current position. Reinforcements are en route. 45 minutes. Maya ran the math in her head, the brutal arithmetic of combat that every soldier learns to calculate. The SEALs had been fighting for 4 hours and were at 30% ammunition. At current consumption rates, they'd be down to final magazines in 20 minutes. Completely dry in 30. They didn't have 45 minutes. They had maybe half an hour before their position was overrun, and it became a close-quarters slaughter that would end with 15 flag-draped coffins and a classified after-action report that would never see public light. Preparing and narrating. This story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Maya's position on the ridge gave her a commanding view of the entire valley. Through breaks in the terrain, she could see the SEAL position, a cluster of boulders and a small mud brick, Shepherd's Hut about 400 meters below the main enemy positions. The SEALs had taken whatever cover they could find and were forming a defensive perimeter, maybe 40 meters across. It was a decent position for what it was, but against this level of sustained assault, it was just a temporary shelter before the inevitable. The enemy had them boxed in beautifully. Heavy fire from the north, where a series of caves provided protected firing positions. Flanking fire from the west, where fighters used a rocky ridgeline for cover. Southern approaches were being probed by what looked like assault teams preparing for a final push. The eastern route, the only possible escape vector, was a sheer cliff dropping 300 feet into a boulder field. The SEALs were trapped with their backs to nothing, and death closing in from 3 directions. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. Her mouth had gone dry despite the water in her camelback. Her hands were steady. 15 years of training ensured that, but her mind was racing through scenarios, calculations, and consequences. She thought about her daughter, Emma, 8 years old, who drew pictures of her mommy in uniform and slept with a photo under her pillow during deployments. She thought about the Article 92 charges she'd face for disobeying direct orders. She thought about the oath she'd taken to support and defend, to obey the orders of the officers appointed over her dot, and then she thought about 15 men dying because someone 6 kilometers away refused to violate protocols that were written by lawyers and politicians who had never heard a bullet crack past their heads, or held a dying friend's hand in the dirt. Maya keyed her radio one final time, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to do. "Talk, this is Overwatch 3-1. SEAL element is in imminent danger of being overrun. They do not have 45 minutes. I am moving to provide precision fire support from elevated position. I have SR-25 with 220 rounds in clear line of sight to enemy positions. Request permission to engage. The response came back immediate and sharp, crackling with alarm and authority. Negative, Overwatch 3-1. You are absolutely not authorized for direct action. Your mission is reconnaissance and observation only. Maintain your current position. That is a direct order. Do you copy? Maya looked down at the valley where muzzle flashes were increasing in intensity as the enemy sensed weakness and prepared for a final assault. She looked at her rifle, at the 11 magazines arranged carefully on her kit, at her rangefinder and ballistic computer. She thought about Emma. She thought about the 15 men below. She thought about being able to look at herself in the mirror. Talk. Overwatch 3-1 copies your last transmission, she said quietly. Then she reached down and switched her radio to the SEAL team's tactical frequency. Cutting off the command channel entirely, she had heard the order. She understood the consequences. And she had made her choice. Staff Sergeant Maya Reeves began moving down the mountain toward the sound of gunfire, toward 15 men she had never met, toward a decision that would define not just her career, but her entire understanding of what it meant to be a soldier, to have power, and to choose how to use it when everything that mattered hung in the balance. The mountains stretched endlessly before her. 6 kilometers of brutal terrain separated her from the men who needed her. She had 30 minutes, maybe less, to cover that ground and get into position. Maya started running. The mission had begun 12 hours earlier, long before the sun crested the jagged peaks of the Hindu Kush, when the world was still draped in the deep purple darkness that preceded dawn at high altitude. Staff Sergeant Maya Reeves had been awake since 0300 hours, running through her pre-mission checklist with the methodical precision that had kept her alive through 4 combat deployments spanning 11 years. Her assignment seemed straightforward on paper. Establish an observation post on Ridge 774, a rocky outcrop at 8,200 feet elevation that overlooked the Karwat Valley. From there, she would provide overwatch for a Joint Special Operations Command mission, targeting a high-value individual believed to be coordinating Taliban operations across 3 provinces. Her role was purely reconnaissance watch, document, report. No direct action. No kinetic engagement. She was to be a ghost, invisible and passive, gathering intelligence while others did the fighting. The SEAL element, Calcine Vanguard, had a more direct mission. 15 operators from SEAL Team 6's Gold Squadron, led by Lieutenant Commander David Cross, were tasked with a capture-or-kill operation against Ahmad Zabi Wardak, a former Afghan National Army officer who had defected to the Taliban 2 years prior and had since orchestrated attacks that killed 37 coalition personnel and hundreds of Afghan civilians. Intelligence placed Wardak at a compound in the lower Karwat Valley, a cluster of mud brick structures, surrounded by terraced farmland and accessible only by a single winding mountain road. The operation was designated Righteous Saber, and according to the intelligence brief Maya had reviewed the night before, it should have been textbook. Insert the SEAL team via helicopter at a landing zone 3 kilometers from the target. Approach on foot under cover of darkness. Establish an outer security perimeter. Breach the compound. Capture or eliminate Wardak. Extract via the same landing zone. Total time on ground, 4 hours maximum. Risk level, moderate. Expected enemy resistance, 812. Taliban fighters with small arms. The intelligence had come from multiple sources, signals, intercepts. Human intelligence from Afghan National Security Forces. And overhead imagery from reconnaissance drones. The National Security Agency had tracked cell phone communications from Wardak's known numbers to towers near the compound. An Afghan informant, codenamed Raven, had provided detailed information about Wardak's security detail and daily routines. Drone footage showed normal patterns of life around the compound, with no indication of reinforced defenses or unusual military activity. Everything pointed to a clean operation. The intelligence was rated high confidence. The Joint Operations Center had approved the mission with only standard precautions. Even the weather cooperated: clear skies, moderate temperatures. Visibility unlimited. Maya had established her observation post at 0430 hours. Well before the SEAL's insertion time of 0515, she'd climbed the ridge in darkness, moving carefully across scree fields and navigating cliff bands that required technical climbing, skills she'd learned during specialized training at Fort Benning. Her position was perfect: elevated, concealed behind a jumble of boulders, with clear sight lines across the entire valley. She set up her spotting scope, her SR-25 rifle, her communications equipment, and her biometric scanner for confirming identity of any high-value targets. At 0515, she watched through her night vision equipment as two MH-60 Black Hawk helicopters swept low through the valley, rotor wash kicking up clouds of dust as they dropped the SEAL team at the designated landing zone. The helicopters disappeared into the darkness within seconds, their sound fading to a distant thump that was swallowed by the vastness of the mountains. The SEALs moved out immediately, spreading into a tactical formation and beginning their approach march toward the target. Compound 3 kilometers to the south. Maya tracked their progress through her night vision, watching the ghostly green figures move with practiced efficiency across the broken terrain. They moved in a wedge formation, maintaining proper intervals, using natural cover, pausing regularly to scan for threats. These were professionals, operators who had trained together for years and executed dozens of similar missions. Lieutenant Commander Cross led from the front, his movements confident and deliberate. The approach took 90 minutes. The SEALs moved slowly, carefully, checking every blind corner and potential ambush point. They circumvented a small village where dogs barked at their passage. They crossed an irrigation canal using a narrow stone bridge. They climbed a terraced hillside planted with struggling wheat. All of it exactly as planned. At 0645 hours. Just as dawn began painting the eastern peaks in shades of orange and gold, the SEAL team reached their objective rally point 200 meters from Wardak's compound. Maya watched as they established a security perimeter, with designated marksmen taking elevated positions while assault teams prepared to breach the compound walls. The compound looked exactly as the intelligence had described it. 3 mud brick buildings arranged around the central courtyard, surrounded by a 6-foot wall with a single wooden gate. A generator hummed somewhere inside. Smoke rose from a cooking fire. A goat wandered in the courtyard. Everything appeared normal, routine, exactly what you'd expect from a rural Afghan compound at dawn. Lieutenant Commander Cross's voice came across the radio. Calm and professional. Overwatch 3-1, Vanguard actual. We are set at the objective. Conducting final reconnaissance before breach. No movement observed. Preparing to initiate. Maya keyed her radio. Vanguard actual, Overwatch 3-1 copies. I have eyes on your position and the objective. No activity visible from elevated position. You are clear to proceed. Roger, Overwatch. Beginning approach in 60 seconds. Maya watched through her scope as the SEAL element split into 2 teams. The primary assault team, 8 operators, stacked up at the compound gate. The secondary team, 7 operators, positioned themselves to cover the compound's rear wall in case Wardak attempted to flee. It was a perfect textbook assault setup that would have made any instructor proud. At exactly 0700 hours, the breach team placed a small explosive charge on the gate's hinges. 3 seconds later, the charge detonated with a sharp crack that echoed across the valley. The gate collapsed inward. The SEALs flowed through the breach like water, moving with synchronized precision into the compound, and that's when everything went catastrophically wrong. The compound erupted in gunfire. Not from inside the buildings as expected, but from positions that had been invisible from ground level, from rooftop positions, from firing ports cut into supposedly solid walls, from spider holes dug into the courtyard floor. The SEALs had walked into a prepared kill zone, but the real ambush wasn't in the compound. The compound was just the bait. As the SEALs engaged the fighters inside the walls, Maya saw movement on the surrounding ridgelines. Through her scope, figures appeared as if materializing from the earth itself, dozens of fighters, emerging from concealed positions in the rocks above the compound. They'd been there all along, invisible, waiting, perfectly camouflaged and disciplined enough to let the SEAL team walk past them during the approach march. Vanguard actual, Overwatch. Maya's voice cut through the radio chatter with urgent intensity. You have enemy forces on the high ground. North, west and south ridgelines. Multiple fighting positions. You're being flanked. The radio exploded with crosstalk as the SEALs realized they were caught in a complex ambush. They had enemy fighters inside the compound engaging them at close range, and enemy positions on 3 sides, pouring fire down into their position from elevated terrain. It was a tactical nightmare caught in a valley floor with no cover and no concealment. Taking fire from multiple directions, with the enemy holding all the advantages, Cross's voice came back. Strained but controlled. Overwatch, Vanguard is taking effective fire from all sides. We're pulling back from the compound to find better cover. Enemy count at least 40 fighters, possibly more. We need immediate support. Maya watched in horror as the tactical situation deteriorated in real time. The SEALs attempted to break contact with the compound fighters and pull back toward a cluster of boulders that offered some protection. But enemy fire from the ridgelines cut them off from their planned escape route. They were being herded, pushed into an even worse position, driven toward a small mud brick, shepherd's hut, and a jumble of rocks that would become their last stand. The ambush had been planned with brutal sophistication. Warduck, if he had even been there at all, wasn't the target. The SEALs were. Someone had leaked the operation. Someone had told the enemy exactly when and where American operators would arrive. And the enemy had prepared a trap that would annihilate an entire SEAL element and deal a devastating blow to American special operations capabilities. As dawn fully broke across the Hindu Kush, illuminating the valley in harsh morning light, Maya counted at least 50 enemy fighters in position surrounding the SEALs, with more moving down from higher elevation positions. The enemy had heavy weapons, PKM machine guns, RPGs, even what looked like a Soviet-era DSHK.51 caliber heavy machine gun being emplaced on a northern ridgeline. The SEALs had walked into an ambush designed by someone who understood American tactics, who knew how SEAL teams operated, who had studied their training and predicted their responses. This wasn't a random encounter. This was a carefully orchestrated kill box, and 15 of America's most elite warriors were trapped inside it. Maya's radio crackled with Cross's first casualty report. Overwatch. Vanguard has 2 men down, 1 urgent surgical, 1 routine. We're consolidating at grid NK4287, 6543. Enemy is attempting to close from 3 sides. We need Kasivik and close air support immediately. She keyed her radio to the Tactical Operations Center frequency, TOC, Overwatch 3-1. Vanguard has made contact with a significant enemy force. Multiple casualties. They are in a prepared ambush with enemy on elevated terrain. Recommend immediate QRF deployment and air support. The talk response was maddeningly calm. Overwatch 3-1, talk copies. We are working air support requests and QRF deployment. Continue to observe and provide updates. TOC, this is a troops in contact emergency. Vanguard needs help now. Overwatch, TOC understands the situation. Assets are being coordinated. Continue your observation mission. Maya stared through her scope at the valley below, watching American operators fighting for their lives against an enemy force that outnumbered them 4-1, and felt the cold, sick realization that the men in the Tactical Operations Center, safe in their air-conditioned room with their computers and their coffee, didn't truly understand the situation at all. They saw reports, numbers, grid coordinates on a map. They were following procedures, working through checklists, coordinating through bureaucratic channels that seemed reasonable in a headquarters, but were utterly divorced from the reality of men dying on a mountainside. The mission that should have been textbook had become a disaster. The intelligence that should have been reliable had been catastrophically wrong or worse, deliberately fed to lure American operators into a trap. And now 15 of the most highly trained soldiers in the world were fighting a desperate, defensive battle they hadn't prepared for, in terrain that favored the enemy, against odds that grew worse with every passing minute. Maya watched through her scope as the firefight intensified, as enemy fighters pressed their advantage, as the SEAL's defensive perimeter contracted under overwhelming pressure. She was 6 kilometers away, too far to help, ordered to observe only. Equipped with a precision rifle and 220 rounds of ammunition that would sit unused while men died, because protocol said her job was to watch, not to act. The sun climbed higher. The firefight raged on. And Maya Reeves began to understand that following orders and doing what was right were about to become two very different things. The firefight had now been raging for 2 hours and 40 minutes. Maya tracked every second on her tactical watch, each tick of the minute hand marking another fragment of time that the SEALs somehow managed to survive against impossible odds. But survival and victory were entirely different things. And what she was witnessing through her Leopold scope wasn't a battle. It was a slow-motion execution. The SEAL element had consolidated their position around the shepherd's hut and boulder cluster, creating a defensive perimeter roughly 35 meters in diameter. It was the best cover available in their immediate area, but best was relative when you were trapped in a valley floor taking fire from elevated positions on 3 sides. The mud brick hut provided some protection from small arms fire, but RPG rounds had already blown holes through 2 of its walls. The boulders offered hard cover, but there weren't enough of them, and the gaps between them left the SEALs exposed to plunging fire from the ridgelines above. Through her scope, Maya could see individual SEAL operators moving between positions, rotating shooters to conserve ammunition, dragging wounded behind cover, returning disciplined fire at enemy positions. These were professionals executing their training, even as the tactical situation deteriorated around them. But training and discipline couldn't manufacture ammunition from thin air, couldn't heal shattered bones and torn flesh, couldn't change the fundamental mathematics of 15 men against 65 in terrain that gave every advantage to the enemy. Lieutenant Commander Cross's situation reports came every 15 minutes now, each one grimmer than the last. His voice remained controlled, the carefully cultivated calm of a special operations officer who knew that panic was contagious and could kill faster than bullets, but Maya could hear the strain underneath, the subtle tightening that came from watching men under your command bleed and die while help remained tantalizingly out of reach. TOC Vanguard Actual. Citrip at time 0940. Current position grid NK4287. 6,543. Enemy force approximately 65 fighters with crew-served weapons. We now have 4 casualties, 2 urgent surgical, 2 priority. Both urgent surgical require immediate CASEVIC, or they will not survive. Ammunition status is critical. Most shooters down to 3 magazines or less. Enemy is maintaining sustained fire and appears to be preparing for a coordinated assault. We have maybe 20 to 30 minutes before we are overrun. Request immediate close air support and emergency extraction. How copy? The Tactical Operations Center response hadn't changed in substance, only in the increasingly bureaucratic language used to explain why help wasn't arriving. Vanguard Actual. TACA copies your situation. Fast movers are still 28 minutes out due to required coordination with Pakistani air defense. Ground QRF is 42 minutes from your location. Kasivek birds cannot insert into contested landing zone. You need to secure and mark an LZ before medical evacuation can be executed. Continue to defend current position. Air support is en route. 28 minutes. Maya did the calculation automatically. The SEALs had been in sustained combat for nearly 3 hours. Combat at this intensity consumed ammunition at catastrophic rates. A skilled operator could burn through a 30-round magazine in seconds during close-quarters fighting. The SEALs had started with basic combat loads, 7 magazines per operator, plus machine gun ammunition, plus grenades and other ordnance. That was roughly 3,000 rounds total for the team at insertion. After 3 hours of sustained contact, they were reporting down to 3 magazines per shooter. That meant they'd expended approximately 70% of their ammunition just staying alive. At current consumption rates, they'd be down to final magazines in 15 minutes. Completely dry in 25. The close air support aircraft would arrive 3 minutes after the SEALs ran out of bullets. The mathematics were brutal and inescapable. The SEALs were going to die. Maya watched through her scope as an RPG streaked across the valley trailing white smoke, impacting against the boulder cluster in a flash of orange flame and black smoke. Shrapnel screamed through the air. One SEAL operator was thrown backward by the concussive force, his body ragdolling across the rocky ground before 2 teammates dragged him behind cover. She couldn't tell if he was the 5th casualty or one of the previous wounded taking another hit. The enemy fire was intensifying now, building toward a crescendo that would culminate in a final assault. Maya could see the tactical picture developing with horrible clarity. The enemy commander, whoever was directing this ambush, was methodical and patient. He was using fire superiority to pin the SEALs in place while systematically destroying their cover with RPG fire. He was forcing them to expend ammunition defending against probing attacks. He was bleeding them slowly, professionally, waiting until they were too weak to resist effectively before committing his full force to the final assault that would overrun the position on the northern ridgeline. She watched enemy fighters repositioning. The DSHK heavy machine gun was now fully emplaced, its distinctive profile visible even at this distance. When that weapon opened up, its .51 caliber rounds would punch through the mud brick walls and light cover that the SEALs were using. It would make their current positions untenable. To the west, she counted at least 20 fighters moving through the rocks, using the terrain expertly to approach closer without exposing themselves to SEAL fire. They were combat veterans, not the poorly trained militia fighters that often made up Taliban forces. These men moved with tactical discipline, used proper fire and movement techniques, and demonstrated a level of military proficiency that suggested formal training, possibly from Pakistani intelligence services or former Afghan National Army officers like Wardak himself. The southern approach showed a different pattern. 8 to 10 fighters there weren't advancing, but they didn't need to. They were positioned to cut off any escape attempt and to pour flanking fire into the SEAL position from a third axis. The trap was perfect. The SEALs couldn't advance, couldn't retreat, and couldn't hold their current position indefinitely. Maya's radio crackled again. This time it wasn't Cross's controlled command voice, but another SEAL operator, younger, speaking rapidly with the clipped urgency of someone reporting during active combat. Vanguard Actual. This is Vanguard 3. The lieutenant commander is hit. RPG shrapnel to the left leg and shoulder. He's still conscious and directing, but he needs attention. A different voice responded, older, carrying the gravelly tone of a senior enlisted man who'd seen too many firefights. Vanguard 3. This is Vanguard 7. I'm taking operational command. Cross, you stay down and let the medic work. That's an order, sir. Cross's voice came back, tight with pain but still functioning. Vanguard 7 has tactical control. I'm still operational, but limited mobility. Continue defense of current position. All elements conserve ammunition single shots only unless enemy closes to 50 meters. We need to make every round count. 5 casualties now. 1/3 of the force wounded, including the commanding officer. Ammunition critically low. No support for at least 25 minutes. The enemy preparing for final assault. Maya felt her heart hammering against her ribs. Her hands gripped the stock of her SR-25, so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Every instinct, every impulse, every fiber of training and experience was screaming at her to do something, to act. To use the weapon in her hands and the skills she'd spent 15 years developing to help the men dying in the valley below. But her orders were explicit and unambiguous. Observation only. No direct action. No kinetic engagement. Her mission was to watch and report, not to intervene. The Tactical Operations Center had been clear. The chain of command had spoken. In the military hierarchy that governed every aspect of her professional life, orders were meant to be followed, not questioned. Certainly not disobeyed. Maya keyed her radio to the TOC frequency one more time, making a final attempt to change their minds through official channels. TOC, Overwatch 3-1. Vanguard element now has 5 casualties including commanding officer. They are critically low on ammunition and will be overrun in approximately 20 minutes. Fast movers will not arrive in time. I have clear line of sight to enemy positions from elevated terrain. I can provide precision fire support with SR-25. Request authorization to engage enemy forces and provide direct support to Vanguard element. There was a pause. 5 seconds, 10, 15. Maya could imagine the scene in the Tactical Operations Center officers and NCOs looking at each other, checking their operations order, reviewing the rules of engagement, calculating risk versus benefit, worrying about precedent and procedure and the thousand bureaucratic considerations that seemed so important when you weren't the one being shot at. Finally, the response came. The voice was different this time, more senior, carrying the weight of command authority. Overwatch 3-1, this is TOC actual. Negative on your request. I say again negative. You are not authorized for direct action. Your mission is reconnaissance and observation. Moving to engage would violate mission parameters and potentially compromise your position. Air support is en route. Ground QRF is en route. Maintain your current position and continue observation. Those are direct orders. Acknowledge. Maya stared at the radio handset, feeling a cold fury building in her chest. Air support was 25 minutes away. The QRF was 40 minutes away. The SEALs had maybe 20 minutes before they were overrun. The math was simple, brutal, and inescapable. She keyed the radio. TOC actual. Overwatch 3-1. I copy your orders. Air support and QRF will not arrive before Vanguard is overrun. 15 men will die if someone doesn't help them right now. I can help them right now. Request you reconsider. Overwatch 3-1, TOC actual. Your assessment is noted. Orders stand. You are explicitly directed to maintain observation position and not engage. If you disobey this direct order, you will face court-martial under Article 92 of the UCMJ. Do you understand these orders? Maya felt the weight of the moment, pressing down on her like physical force. This was it. The decision point. The fork in the road where she chose who she was going to be and what she was going to stand. For when everything was on the line, she could obey orders. She could stay in her observation post and watch 15 men die, while she sat safe on a ridgeline with a weapon in her hands and the skills to use it. She could file her reports and document the catastrophe and attend the memorial service and pin her career to the very reasonable explanation that she was just following orders. Doing her job, staying in her lane, or she could violate every protocol. Disobey explicit commands, throw away 15 years of service, and likely face criminal charges. All on the chance, not the guarantee, but the chance that she could make a difference. Maya thought about her daughter Emma, about the promise she'd made to always come home, about the college fund and the house and the life she'd built through careful adherence to regulations and respect for the chain of command. Then she looked through her scope at the valley below, at the muzzle flashes and the smoke and the desperate defensive stand of 15 men who had done everything right, who had followed their orders, who had trusted that their service would protect them, and who were now being abandoned by the very system they'd sworn to defend. She keyed the radio one final time. Talk actual. Overwatch 3-1. I copy your direct order to maintain position and not engage. Then, very deliberately, Maya reached down and switched her radio from the command frequency to the SEAL team's tactical frequency. She left the command channel entirely, cutting off the voices from the Tactical Operations Center, with their procedures and protocols and careful risk calculations. She had heard the order. She understood it completely. She acknowledged it clearly, and now she was going to disobey it. Maya grabbed her SR-25 rifle and conducted a final equipment check. 11 magazines of 7.62 mm NATO ammunition, 20 rounds per magazine. 220 rounds total, rangefinder, ballistic computer, water, medical kit. Everything she needed for what came next. She looked at the valley one more time, calculating distances, plotting routes, identifying firing positions. 6 kilometers of brutal mountain terrain separated her from the men who needed her. She had maybe 15 to 18 minutes to cover that ground and get into an effective firing position before the SEALs were overrun. It was impossible. The terrain was too rough, the distance too great, the time too short. Maya started moving anyway. She scrambled down from her observation post, moving as quickly as the terrain allowed, picking her way across scree fields and around cliff bands, using every technique she'd learned in mountain warfare, school to move fast without breaking an ankle or taking a fatal tumble down a slope. Behind her, the radio she'd left on the command frequency crackled with increasingly urgent calls. Overwatch 3-1. TOC actual. Respond immediately. Overwatch 3-1. Acknowledge. But Maya wasn't listening anymore. She was running toward the sound of gunfire, toward 15 men she'd never met, toward a choice that would define everything that came after. The mountain stretched endlessly before her. 6 kilometers had never seemed so far, and time had never moved so fast. Maya's boots hammered against the rocky mountainside as she descended from the observation post. Her SR-25 rifle strapped diagonally across her back. Her body weight shifted forward in a controlled fall that was barely short of reckless. Every step was a calculated risk. Move too slowly, and the SEALs would be dead before she arrived. Move too recklessly, and she'd shatter an ankle or tumble down a cliff face and be useless to everyone. The Hindu Kush was unforgiving terrain even when you weren't in a desperate race against time. The mountains were composed of loose shale and crumbling sedimentary rock that shifted treacherously underfoot. Ancient goat trails zigzagged across impossible slopes, sometimes leading somewhere useful, sometimes ending abruptly at cliff edges that would send you plummeting hundreds of feet. The elevation made every breath feel inadequate, every muscle burn with oxygen debt. Every movement require conscious effort against the altitude's draining effects. Maya had spent 8 months operating in these mountains. She knew them the way a sailor knows the sea, with respect bordering on fear, but also with the intimate understanding that comes from daily immersion. She knew which types of rock would hold your weight and which would crumble. She knew which gullies offered fast descent routes and which were death traps filled with loose scree. She knew where the underground springs created patches of vegetation that indicated more stable soil, and where the bare rock faces were too steep and smooth to traverse safely. That knowledge was saving her life now, allowing her to move at speeds that would have been suicidal for someone unfamiliar with the terrain. She found a goat trail that switched back down the ridgeline, following it for 300 meters before cutting across country when the trail bent the wrong direction. She slid down a scree field in a barely controlled descent, using her rifle as a balance point, sending avalanches of loose rock cascading below her. She traversed a cliff band by finding a natural weakness in the rock face, pulling herself across using handholds that her previous reconnaissance missions had already mapped. 3 kilometers to go. The sound of gunfire was growing louder now, no longer a distant echo, but a sustained roar that spoke to the intensity of the engagement. She could distinguish individual weapon systems by their acoustic signatures, the sharp crack of M4 carbines, the heavier thump of M240 machine guns, the ragged chatter of AK-47s, the whoosh and crump of RPG launches and impacts. The battle was building toward a crescendo. Maya's tactical radio, switched to the SEAL frequency, provided a running commentary on the deteriorating situation. The voices were professional, controlled, but she could hear the desperation underneath. Vanguard 7. This is Vanguard 4. We've got movement on the western approach. Approximately 20 fighters massing in the rocks at 200 meters. They're preparing to rush our position. Vanguard 4. 7 copies. Hold fire until they close to 100 meters. Make every round count. We're down to 2 mags per shooter. Vanguard 7. This is Vanguard 9. Doc says Ramirez isn't going to make it without surgical intervention in the next 30 minutes. The femoral artery is compromised. He's losing too much blood. Copy 9. Keep pressure on it. Do what you can. Kasivak is. A pause. Kasivak is inbound. The lie was transparent. Everyone on the team knew the Kasivak birds couldn't land in a hot landing zone, couldn't come in while the area was under fire. Ramirez was going to die unless the tactical situation changed dramatically in the next 30 minutes. Another man would die because help was just too far away, too slow, too constrained by procedures and protocols. Maya pushed harder. Ignoring the burning in her lungs and the protest from muscles worked beyond normal endurance. She crossed a narrow ridge where the trail was barely 18 inches wide, with 1,000-foot drops on both sides, moving at a pace that would have terrified her under normal circumstances. She jumped a gap between rock formations that she normally would have carefully negotiated. She slid down a nearly vertical section, using friction techniques that left her hands scraped and bleeding. 2 kilometers to go. 15 minutes had elapsed since she'd left the observation post. She was making better time than she'd hoped, but it still might not be enough. The radio crackled again. All Vanguard elements. This is 7. Enemy is initiating final assault. Western and northern approaches. Multiple fighters advancing. Engage at will. Make them pay for every meter. The sound of gunfire intensified dramatically. Through gaps in the terrain ahead, Maya could see muzzle flashes now, could see the smoke rising from the valley floor, where the SEAL position was being systematically destroyed by superior firepower. The DSHK heavy machine gun opened up from the northern ridge, its deep hammering distinctive even at this distance. Each round was .51 caliber, powerful enough to punch through body armor, through light cover. Through the mud brick walls the SEALs were sheltering behind, She descended into a ravine, following a dry stream that cut through the terrain in the direction she needed to go. The ravine provided cover and a relatively flat route, but it also channeled her movement, limited her options. If she encountered enemy forces in the confined space, there would be no room to maneuver. She'd have to fight through or die trying. Maya's mind was racing through tactical calculations, even as her body moved on autopilot. She needed an elevated firing position with clear line of sight to the enemy positions. The SEAL location was in a valley depression with enemy forces on 3 surrounding ridgelines. To be effective, she needed height and an angle that would let her engage the elevated enemy positions. Without hitting the SEALs below, she remembered a terrain feature from her initial reconnaissance of the area, a rocky knob, approximately 400 meters northwest of the SEAL position, elevated about 60 meters above the valley floor. It wasn't perfect. She'd be shooting at angles between 350 and 600 meters, with various enemy positions requiring different elevation holds, but it offered the best combination of height, concealment, and fields of fire. That became her target. Get to the knob. Establish firing position. Start killing enemy fighters before they overran the SEAL position. 1 kilometer to go. The ravine she was following opened into a wider valley, and suddenly Maya found herself in more exposed terrain. She could see the SEAL position now, maybe 1,200 meters to her southeast, smoke rising. Muzzle flashes sparking from behind boulders and the damaged shepherd's hut. Tracer rounds streaking across the valley in both directions like deadly fireflies. She could also see enemy positions much more clearly. The northern ridgeline was crawling with fighters, at least 20 visible from her angle. The western approach showed concentrated movement where the assault was developing. The southern blocking positions were maintaining fire to prevent any breakout attempt, and she could see casualties. Even at this distance, through her rifle scope, she could make out bodies behind the SEAL defensive perimeter. Some were moving, wounded but alive. At least one wasn't moving at all. These weren't statistics anymore, weren't abstract concepts. They were men with faces and families and futures that were being extinguished while she watched. Maya's radio erupted with urgent transmissions. Vanguard 7, this is 4. They're through the western perimeter. We've got enemy inside 50 meters. Engaging close quarters. All elements, shift fire west. Keep them off 4's position. Grenade out. The distinctive crump of fragmentary grenades detonating. Sustained automatic weapons fire. Men shouting, screaming, dying. 600 meters to go. Maya was sprinting now, abandoning caution for speed, running across open ground where any enemy observer with binoculars could spot her. But it didn't matter anymore. Stealth and concealment were luxuries she couldn't afford. The SEALs were in close quarters battle, the final desperate stage before being overrun entirely. She reached the base of the rocky knob and started climbing, using her hands as much as her feet, pulling herself up the steep slope through sheer determination and the adrenaline flooding her system. 50 meters of vertical elevation that felt like climbing a mountain. Her rifle slammed against her back with every movement. Her equipment caught on rocks and vegetation. Her lungs burned. Her vision narrowed to a tunnel focused on the next handhold, the next foothold. The next meter of elevation gained. The radio painted an increasingly desperate picture. 7. We're being flanked from the south. They used the western assault as a diversion. Vanguard 2 is down. Man down. We're out of ammo for the 240. Switching to rifles. 30 meters to climb. 2010. Maya's hands were bleeding, her uniform torn, her body pushed beyond what she thought possible. But she kept moving because stopping meant death, not her death, but the death of 15 men who had no one else, no other chance. No other option. She reached the top of the knob and threw herself. behind a cluster of boulders that would provide cover and a shooting rest. Her hands were shaking from exertion, from adrenaline, from the magnitude of what she was about to do. She forced them steady through pure willpower, years of training overriding the body's natural responses. Maya unslung her SR-25 and dropped into a prone shooting position behind the boulder. She pulled her Leopold scope to her eye and began scanning the battlefield. Her mind automatically cataloging targets, calculating ranges, prioritizing threats. The SEAL position was 380 meters to her southeast, slightly below her elevation. The northern enemy ridgeline was 425 meters, elevated slightly above her. The western approach was 340 meters, roughly level. Southern blocking positions were 520 meters. The longest shot she'd have to make. She pulled out her laser rangefinder and began marking exact distances to key terrain features, entering data into her ballistic computer. Wind speed approximately 8 miles per hour from the west. Temperature 78 degrees. Elevation 8,100 feet. Humidity low. All factors that would affect bullet trajectory at these distances. Her scope had holed over. Marks calculated for various distances. But at the angles and ranges she was shooting, every shot would require judgment and compensation. The SR-25 was capable of roughly 800-meter effective range, but accurate shots at 500-plus meters required skill, experience, and a bit of luck. Maya had all three. More importantly, she had 220 rounds of ammunition and the determination to use every single one. She keyed her radio to the SEAL frequency. Vanguard 7. This is Reaper 1-6. I'm in an elevated position 400 meters northwest of your location with an SR-25 and full combat load. I can provide precision fire support on enemy positions. How copy? A pause, gunfire, explosions, then a voice rough with combat stress and disbelief. Reaper 1-6. Vanguard 7. Say again your last transmission. Did you say fire support? Affirmative 7. I have eyes on enemy positions from elevated terrain. I can engage targets by your priority. What do you need? Another pause, longer this time. Maya could imagine the senior SEAL trying to process this impossible development help arriving from a source he didn't know existed, authorized by orders he hadn't received, offered by a lone sniper who had somehow materialized at exactly the right place and time. Reaper 1-6, are you authorized to be here? Are you official support? Maya took a breath. This was the moment of absolute commitment. Once she answered this question honestly, there was no going back, no plausible deniability, no way to claim she'd misunderstood her orders. -7. I'm operating on my own initiative. I was ordered to observe only. I chose to disobey. But I'm here, I'm capable, and you need help. It's your call, but make it fast because you're about to be overrun. The longest pause yet. 3 seconds, 4, 5. In those 5 seconds, the senior SEAL was making his own impossible choice: accept help from an unauthorized source and implicate himself in her violations, or refuse and watch his team die with help literally at hand. Reaper 1-6. Vanguard 7. We are 30 seconds from being overrun. We have 7 operational shooters, multiple wounded, almost out of ammunition. If you can help, we need it right fucking now. Priority targets are the DSHK position on the northern ridge and the assault element coming from the west. Can you engage? Maya settled her cheek against the rifle stock, feeling the familiar weight and balance of the weapon that had become an extension of her body over thousands of training repetitions. Through her scope, she could see the DSHK heavy machine gun crew, 3 men operating the weapon, 2 more feeding ammunition. Vanguard 7, Reaper 1-6. I can engage. Stand by for fire on the northern ridge. Keep your heads down. She placed her crosshair on the DSHK gunner's center mass, calculated the holdover for 425 meters with an 8-mile-per-hour crosswind, controlled her breathing, and let the moment stretch into perfect focus. Then Staff Sergeant Maya Reeves, in direct violation of explicit orders, in defiance of every protocol and regulation that governed her service, squeezed the trigger and committed herself irrevocably to a choice that would save lives or destroy her career. The rifle cracked. The bullet flew. And everything changed. The SR-25 bucked against Maya's shoulder, the suppressor reducing but not eliminating the sharp crack of the 7.62 millimeters round, leaving the barrel at 2,800 feet per second. Through her scope, she watched the bullet's impact, the DSHK gunner's body jerking backward as the round punched through his chest cavity, the distinctive pink mist that marked a center mass hit at distance, the way he collapsed across the heavy machine gun he'd been using to systematically destroy the SEAL position. Maya didn't pause to admire her work. The semi-automatic capability of the SR-25 was precisely why she'd chosen this weapon system over traditional bolt-action sniper rifles, where a bolt gun required her to break her sight picture, work the action, reacquire the target, and fire again, a process taking 3 to 4 seconds. The SR-25 allowed her to maintain her cheek, weld and sight alignment while the rifle's gas-operated system automatically chambered the next round. She shifted her point of aim 12 inches to the left, where the DSHK assistant gunner was already reaching for the weapon's controls to continue firing. Her crosshair settled on his torso. Exhale, squeeze. The rifle cracked again. The assistant gunner dropped, his body falling across the first casualty in a tangle of limbs and blood. The two ammunition bearers were slower to react, their brains still processing the fact that their gunner and assistant had just been killed by fire from an unexpected direction. That hesitation cost them their lives. Maya engaged the third man as he turned to scan for the source of the incoming fire. The fourth man managed to dive behind cover, but not before Maya's bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him tumbling down the rocky slope. 4 shots. 4 hits, 3 kills and 1 combat ineffective. Total elapsed time, 11 seconds. The DSHK heavy machine gun, the weapon that had been systematically destroying the SEALs' defensive cover, fell silent. Maya's radio crackled immediately. Reaper 1-6 Vanguard 7. Whatever you just did to that DSHK, you just saved our asses. The northern pressure just dropped by half. Copy 7. Shifting fire to western assault element. Give me talking targets. Western approach, approximately 350 meters from our position. Multiple fighters using the boulder field for cover. They're massing for a final push on our perimeter. Maya swung her rifle to the west, scanning through her scope for the assault element. The terrain there was a jumbled chaos of house-sized boulders and smaller rocks, creating dozens of covered approaches and firing positions. She could see muzzle flashes sparking from behind various rocks as enemy fighters maintained suppressive fire on the SEAL position while their assault team prepared to rush the final distance. Tactical problem was more complex than the DSHK engagement. The heavy machine gun crew had been stationary, fully exposed, operating a crew-served weapon that required them to stay in one place. The assault element was dispersed, using cover effectively, moving between positions. She couldn't just shoot them one after another. They'd adapt, take better cover, become harder targets. Maya needed to disrupt their assault before it developed momentum. That meant hitting the leaders, the men directing the attack, the ones coordinating movement and fire. She scanned methodically, looking for the telltale indicators of command and control. Men using radios. Men gesturing and directing others. Men positioned slightly back from the assault line, where they could observe and control. She found her target behind a large boulder at 340 meters. A fighter wearing a distinctive dark green vest, one hand holding a radio handset to his ear, the other pointing toward the SEAL position while he barked orders. The men around him were clearly waiting for his signal to initiate the final assault. Maya placed her crosshair on his center mass, compensated slightly for the crosswind, and fired. The man dropped mid-sentence, the radio falling from his hand. The fighters around him hesitated, looking at their fallen leader, momentarily uncertain about what to do next. Maya didn't give them time to figure it out. She shifted to a fighter who'd been receiving orders from the dead commander, a man who was now trying to take charge and rally the assault team. Her second shot took him in the upper chest. He fell backward, disappearing behind the boulder he'd been using for cover. A third man, older, with a gray beard visible even at this distance, stepped forward to assume command. Maya shot him before he'd taken 3 steps. The assault element was beginning to lose cohesion. Men who moments ago had been preparing to rush the SEAL position, now taking deeper cover and looking around nervously for the source of the precision fire that was systematically eliminating their leadership. Through her scope, Maya tracked another fighter who was trying to rally a small group. Waving his AK-47 and shouting what she assumed were encouragements or orders, she put a round through his chest. The men he'd been rallying scattered instead, abandoning their assault positions and pulling back to more distant cover. Vanguard 7, Reaper 1-6. I've engaged multiple targets in the western assault element. They're falling back. Recommend your people exploit this and recover any ammunition from your perimeter. Copy, Reaper. We're moving now. Maya maintained her vigil on the western approach, watching for any sign that the assault was reorganizing. The SR-25's magazine held 20 rounds, and she'd now expended 8-4 on the DSHK position, 4 on the assault element leadership. 12 rounds remaining in the current magazine, with 10 more full magazines in her kit. She needed to manage her ammunition carefully. 220 rounds sounded like a lot until you were in a target-rich environment against 60-plus enemy fighters. Movement on the northern ridge caught her attention. Enemy fighters were repositioning, trying to figure out what had happened to their heavy machine gun crew. Several were clustered around the silent DSHK, examining the bodies, looking confused and angry. They were exposed, standing in the open, making themselves perfect targets while they tried to understand how their supposedly secure position had been compromised. Maya took advantage of their mistake. She engaged the nearest fighter at 430 meters, the bullet catching him high in the chest and spinning him around. Before his body hit the ground, she'd shifted to a second target and fired again. The man dropped. The remaining fighters suddenly realized they were taking fire from a new direction and scattered like startled birds, abandoning the DSHK position entirely and diving for cover among the rocks. 2 more kills. 10 rounds expended from her current magazine. The tactical picture was shifting rapidly. The DSHK that had been pinning down the SEALs was silent, its crew dead or scattered. The western assault element that had been 30 seconds from overrunning the SEAL position had fallen back in disorder, their leaders dead and their momentum broken. The northern pressure had decreased dramatically as fighters took deeper cover to avoid the precision fire coming from an unexpected angle. Maya knew this advantage was temporary. The enemy commander, whoever was directing this ambush, would adapt. He'd identify her firing position, redirect forces to neutralize her, adjust his tactics to account for the new threat. She'd bought the SEALs time and breathing room, but the fundamental situation hadn't changed. They were still outnumbered, still low on ammunition. Still trapped, her radio crackled with Lieutenant Commander Cross's voice. Strained with pain but carrying unmistakable authority. Reaper 1-6, this is Vanguard Actual. I've regained command. What's your situation? Who authorized your fire support? Maya continued scanning for targets as she keyed her radio. Vanguard Actual, Reaper 1-6. No one authorized it. I was ordered to observe only. I chose to disobey that order because you were about to be overrun and no official support was going to arrive in time. A pause. Reaper, are you telling me you're operating without authorization? That you violated orders to provide us support? Affirmative, Actual. I made a judgment call. You needed help. I was in position to provide it. The math was simple. Another pause, longer this time. Maya could imagine cross-processing this information while simultaneously managing his wounded team, coordinating their defense, and dealing with the pain from his own injuries. Reaper 1-6 Vanguard Actual. I don't know who you are or what possessed you to commit career suicide for a bunch of strangers, but you just saved at least 6 lives in the last 3 minutes. We're still in deep shit, but we went from definitely going to die to might actually survive. What's your ammunition status? Currently at 190 remaining. I can sustain operations for approximately 20 to 30 minutes depending on target availability. What's your status? We've got 7 shooters still in the fight, 5 wounded including myself. We recovered some ammunition from our perimeter, about 40 rounds total. We're in better shape than we were 5 minutes ago, but still critically low. Air support is... Cross paused, and Maya could hear the bitterness in his voice. Air support is still 15 minutes out. We need to hold for 15 more minutes. 15 minutes. Maya ran the calculations. Her presence had disrupted the enemy's assault timetable and reduced their immediate pressure, but they still had overwhelming numerical superiority. Once they adapted to her fire and located her position, they'd find ways to neutralize her while simultaneously pressing the seals. 15 minutes felt like an eternity. Copy, Actual. I'll do what I can. Give me priority targets as they develop. Maya swept her scope across the battlefield, cataloging threats and opportunities. The southern blocking positions were the furthest away 500 to 550 meters, but they were maintaining steady fire on the SEAL position, keeping the team pinned from that direction. She could engage them, but the extended range would make precise shooting more difficult and would consume ammunition less efficiently. The western approach, still, showed scattered fighters. Though they were being more cautious now, staying in hard cover and only exposing themselves briefly to fire. The northern ridge was quiet after her engagement of the DSHK crew, but she could see movement in the rock suggesting fighters were repositioning to secondary positions. She needed to be unpredictable, to keep the enemy off balance, to prevent them from fixing her location and coordinating a response. That meant varying her targets, changing her rate of fire, shooting from slightly different positions within her rocky knob to alter the angle of fire. Movement on the western approach. A fighter darting between boulders, trying to advance on the SEAL position. Maya tracked him, led his movement slightly, and fired. The man went down hard, tumbling across the rocky ground. 11 rounds remaining in her current magazine. A second fighter, emboldened or foolish, tried to rush forward to help his fallen comrade. Maya shot him before he'd covered 10 meters. 10 rounds remaining. More movement on the northern ridge. 3 fighters attempting to reoccupy the DSHK position, probably trying to get the weapon back into action. Maya engaged the lead man at 425 meters. He dropped. The other 2 immediately abandoned their attempt and retreated back into cover. 9 rounds remaining. She was establishing a pattern of dominance, making the enemy reluctant to expose themselves, forcing them to move cautiously and think twice before taking aggressive action. Every fighter she killed reduced their numerical advantage slightly. Every fighter she forced into cover reduced their ability to mass fires on the SEAL position. Every moment she kept them disrupted and reactive was another moment the SEALs could use to reorganize, redistribute ammunition, and treat their wounded. Vanguard Actual, Reaper 1-6. I'm seeing decreased enemy activity across all approaches. They're adapting to my fire. Recommend you use this lull to consolidate your position and prepare for their next push. Copy, Reaper. We're working it. Our medic says Ramirez is stable for now. You bought him the time he needed. Rodriguez is patching up the El Tai's wounds. We're redistributing ammunition and grenades. If we can hold for another 12 minutes, the fast movers will be overhead and this whole thing changes. 12 minutes. Maya checked her magazine, 9 rounds remaining. She conducted a tactical reload, removing the partially depleted magazine and inserting a fresh 20-rounder. She placed the 9-round magazine in a pocket rather than back in her vest. Partial magazines could be consolidated later if needed. Total ammunition remaining 199 rounds. Across 10 magazines, through her scope, Maya saw the enemy beginning to adapt. Fighters were using smoke, crude but effective, probably from burning tires or vegetation, to obscure their movements. They were coordinating better, with multiple positions providing covering fire while others moved. They were learning, adjusting, becoming more dangerous, and somewhere among those 60 remaining fighters, an enemy commander was trying to locate her position, was directing forces to neutralize this unexpected threat that had disrupted his carefully planned ambush. Maya knew what was coming next. The enemy would try to fix her position through observation of her muzzle flash and bullet trajectories. They'd mass fires on her location to suppress her or force her to displace. They'd possibly try to maneuver forces to assault her position directly. She was one person with a rifle against an organized enemy force that now knew she existed and wanted her dead. The tactical situation was still desperate, just desperate in new and different ways. But for the moment, for these critical minutes while air support raced to arrive, Maya Reeves owned this battlefield. Every fighter who exposed himself risked her attention. Every attempt to mass forces drew her fire. Every commander who tried to coordinate was marked for death. She settled deeper into her firing position, controlled her breathing, and continued her deadly work. The battle was far from over, but 15 men who should have been dead were still fighting. Still breathing, still hoping, and that made every violation, every broken rule, every consequence waiting for her absolutely worth it. The smoke began drifting across the battlefield in thick, oily clouds, black and gray plumes that obscured sight lines and created visual chaos. Maya watched through her scope as the enemy's tactical adaptation unfolded with professional competence. They were burning tires, setting small fires with wet vegetation, using crude smoke generators to create concealment for their movements. It was primitive compared to modern military smoke systems, but effective nonetheless. The smoke complicated Maya's targeting calculation significantly. Her Leopold scope was optical, not thermal. She couldn't see through the obscuration the way night vision could penetrate darkness. She had to wait for breaks in the smoke, for moments when wind cleared sight lines or when targets silhouetted themselves against clearer backgrounds. Her rate of fire dropped from sustained engagement, opportunistic shooting, taking targets when they presented themselves rather than methodically working through enemy positions. Through a gap in the smoke at 380 meters, she spotted a fighter sprinting between cover positions. Maya led him by 2 body widths to account for his movement speed and the crosswind, squeezed the trigger, and watched him tumble forward into a sprawling fall that didn't get back up. 19 rounds remaining in her current magazine. The radio traffic from the SEAL position reflected their own tactical adjustments. With reduced immediate pressure, they were using the breathing room to reorganize their defense, redistribute their limited ammunition, and provide better treatment for their wounded. Cross's voice came across professional and controlled despite his injuries. Vanguard elements, this is actual. Consolidate ammunition by weapon system. Machine gunners get priority on 5.56. Designated marksmen get the heavier loads. Grenadiers, save your 40mm for danger close situations. We've got 10 minutes until air support arrives. Our job is to stay alive for 10 minutes. Reaper's fire is giving us that chance, don't waste it. Maya appreciated the recognition, but she was increasingly concerned about the enemy's next move. They'd adapted to her fire, but they hadn't located her position yet. That would change. Every muzzle flash, every bullet trajectory, every kill provided data points that a competent enemy could use to triangulate her location. She'd been firing for approximately 8 minutes from essentially the same position. In military terms, that was staying in one place. Far too long. She needed to displace to move to an alternate firing position before the enemy fixed her location and brought concentrated fire or a direct assault against her rocky knob. But displacing meant abandoning her current position with its excellent fields of fire, spending time moving that could be used shooting, and potentially losing sight of the SEAL position during critical moments. The decision was made for her when she saw movement on the ridgeline to her, not at the DSHK position, but further west, approximately 600 meters from her location. Through her scope, she counted 4 fighters moving purposefully along the ridge in her direction. They weren't attacking the SEALs. They were maneuvering toward her. The enemy commander had figured out roughly where her fire was coming from and was sending a team to neutralize her. It was the tactically correct response: eliminate or suppress the sniper, then resume the assault on the primary target. Maya had perhaps 10 to 15 minutes before that fire team reached an assault position on her location. She keyed her radio. Vanguard actual, Reaper 1-6. Be advised, I have enemy forces maneuvering toward my position. I'll continue fire support as long as possible, but I may need to displace or defend myself shortly. How copy? Reaper, Vanguard actual copies. Do what you need to do. We're in better shape than we were, but we still need your fire. Air support is 8 minutes out. 8 minutes. Maya ran the math again. The fire team moving on her position would need approximately 12 to 15 minutes to close the distance given the terrain. Air support would arrive before they reached her. If she could hold this position for 8 more minutes, the entire tactical situation would transform when Air Force F-16S arrived overhead with precision-guided munitions and 20mm cannons. 8 minutes of holding this position, maintaining fire on enemy forces around the SEAL position, while simultaneously watching for the assault team that was hunting her. 8 minutes that would feel like 8 hours. Maya returned her attention to the primary battlefield. The smoke was beginning to dissipate slightly as the fires burned down and wind pushed the clouds around. She could see the SEAL position more clearly, now the damaged shepherd's hut with its blown-out walls. The boulder cluster where the team had consolidated. The bodies of fallen fighters scattered around the perimeter from earlier assault attempts. She could also see the enemy forces with greater clarity. They'd taken significant casualties from her fire. She estimated at least 12 to 15 killed or seriously wounded, but they still maintained overwhelming numerical superiority. Approximately 50 fighters remained in the engagement, though they were now more cautious, more dispersed, more reluctant to expose themselves. Movement on the southern blocking positions caught her attention. A group of 8 to 10 fighters was repositioning, moving from their static positions down into the valley, clearly preparing to join what would be a final coordinated assault from multiple directions. The enemy commander was committing his reserve, preparing to overwhelm the SEAL, positioned through sheer mass before air support could arrive. Maya engaged the lead fighter at 540 meters, one of the longest shots she'd attempted during this engagement. The increased range meant more bullet drop, more wind drift, more time of flight for the target to potentially move. She held her crosshair 3 feet above the man's head to compensate for bullet drop at this distance, led him slightly for the wind, exhaled, and fired. The bullet took longer to arrive, roughly 6/10 of a second flight time, compared to 4/10 at 400 meters. She watched through her scope as the fighter collapsed, the distinctive reaction of a solid hit. The men around him immediately went to ground, taking cover and abandoning their advance. 18 rounds remaining. She shifted to a second target, a fighter who was trying to drag the wounded man to cover. At 530 meters, she held slightly lower, adjusted for wind, and fired. Another hit. The fighter released his comrade and scrambled for cover himself, leaving the wounded man in the open. 17 rounds remaining. The southern assault had stalled before it developed momentum. Maya had learned through 4 deployments that killing wasn't the only way to achieve effects on a battlefield. Wounding did it too. Perhaps even better, a dead fighter was a statistic. But a wounded fighter screaming in pain was a psychological weapon that affected morale and forced the enemy to expend resources on casualty evacuation. Vanguard Actual, Reaper 1-6. Southern assault element has been disrupted. They're taking cover and pulling back. You've got maybe 5 to 6 minutes before they reorganize and try again. Copy, Reaper. Outstanding shooting. We're watching from down here, and we've never seen anything like this. You're changing the entire battle by yourself. Maya didn't respond to the compliment. She was already scanning for new threats, watching the fire team that was hunting her, monitoring all approaches to the SEAL position, calculating ammunition expenditure and time remaining. Her world had narrowed to the view through her scope. The weight of the rifle, the controlled breathing that preceded each shot, the mathematical precision required to send bullets accurately across hundreds of meters of mountain air. The assault team moving toward her position had covered approximately 200 meters and was now at 400 meters from her location. 4 fighters moving tactically, using cover well, clearly experienced in mountain warfare. She could engage them. At 400 meters they were well within her effective range, but that would definitively reveal her position and might provoke an immediate response from other enemy elements. Better to let them come closer, force them to commit to an assault, then engage when they were in the open dot movement on the western approach to the SEAL position. The smoke had cleared enough to show a significant group of fighters gathering behind the boulder field. Maya counted at least 15 men, a major concentration of forces preparing for what looked like a coordinated push. They were organizing properly, with what appeared to be a leader directing their positioning. This was the threat. This was the assault that could overwhelm the SEAL position if it developed fully. Maya needed to disrupt it now, before they achieved coordination and momentum. She identified the leader, a tall man in darker clothing, holding a radio, positioned slightly behind the assault line where he could observe and direct. At 355 meters, he was a difficult but manageable shot, partially concealed behind the boulder with only his upper body visible. Maya settled her crosshair on his center mass, compensated for wind and angle, and squeezed the trigger. The bullet impacted high and right, striking the boulder instead of the target, a miss, her first of the engagement. The leader immediately dropped from view. Warned by the bullet's impact, she cursed silently. The miss wasn't catastrophic, but it was a reminder that even at these ranges, with quality equipment and extensive training, shooting wasn't automatic. Variables existed: wind gusts, slight movements, imperfect trigger control, the inherent mechanical limitations of the weapon system. Every shot was a probability calculation, not a certainty. The assault element in the west was now alert to her fire, taking deeper cover, moving more cautiously. But they were still there, still organizing, still preparing to rush the SEAL position. Maya engaged a fighter who exposed himself to coordinate with adjacent positions. The round caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him behind cover. 16 rounds remaining. A second fighter moved to help the wounded man. Maya fired again, this time missing as her target dove for cover before the bullet arrived. 15 rounds remaining. She was burning through ammunition faster than ideal, but the tactical situation demanded aggressive fire to prevent the assault from developing. Vanguard Actual, Reaper 1-6. Major enemy concentration in the western boulder field. Approximately 15 fighters preparing coordinated assault. I'm engaging now, but they're in hard cover. You need to be ready for a serious push from that direction. Copy, Reaper. We see them. We've got our remaining grenades positioned to engage that approach. Our machine gun has about 60 rounds left. When they come, we'll make it hurt, but we can't hold indefinitely. How long until air? Maya checked her watch. 5 minutes actual. 5 more minutes and this entire thing changes. 5 minutes. 300 seconds. An eternity in combat, where entire battles could be won or lost in the time it took to reload a magazine. The assault team hunting her had close to 300 meters and was moving with increased caution. Clearly aware they were approaching her general location. Through her scope, she could see them communicating with hand signals, coordinating their approach, preparing to rush her position from multiple angles simultaneously. Maya made a tactical decision. She conducted another magazine change, replacing her current magazine with 15 rounds with a fresh 20-round magazine. She now had 195 rounds remaining across 9 full magazines and 1 partial. She placed the partial magazine in an accessible pocket and prepared for what was coming. The enemy commander was making his final push. The Western assault element would hit the SEAL position while the team hunting her would assault her location, eliminating her supporting fire and allowing the main assault to succeed. It was a sound tactical plan that would probably work if she remained passive. Maya had no intention of remaining passive. She shifted her position slightly, moving 5 meters to her right to a different cluster of boulders that offered a slightly different angle on both the SEAL position and the approaching fire team. The movement took 30 seconds. 30 seconds when she wasn't providing covering fire, but it gave her fresh concealment and prevented the enemy from having an exact fix on her location. From her new position, Maya reacquired the Western assault element through her scope. They were moving now, beginning their rush toward the SEAL position in a coordinated wave. 15 fighters advancing by fire and movement, some providing covering fire while others rushed forward, using proper infantry tactics that would eventually overwhelm the undermanned, under-ammunition SEAL defense. Unless Maya stopped them first, she began engaging the advancing fighters systematically, prioritizing targets who were moving over those providing covering fire. A fighter sprinting between boulders went down at 340 meters. Another advancing on the SEAL flank dropped at 365 meters. A third took a round through the leg and collapsed, screaming. 17 rounds remaining in her magazine. The assault began to lose coordination as fighters realized they were being engaged from the flank by precision fire. Some continued forward. Others hesitated. Still others took cover and tried to identify her position. The unified wave fractured into individual fighters making individual decisions. And individual fighters could be engaged one at a time. Maya worked through the assault element methodically, her rifle cracking every 3 to 5 seconds as she found targets, calculated holds, and fired. The Western assault, which moments ago had seemed unstoppable, disintegrated under her sustained fire. Fighters retreated, took cover, abandoned their attack, but her success came at a cost. Every muzzle flash, every shot, every kill further refined the enemy's understanding of where she was. And the fire team hunting her had used her distraction with the Western assault to close the distance. They were now at 150 meters and moving fast, rushing her position while she was focused elsewhere. By the time Maya swung her rifle around to engage them, they were already splitting up, approaching her rocky knob from 2 different directions to prevent her from engaging all of them simultaneously. Maya had perhaps 60 seconds before they reached assault range. She had 18 rounds in her current magazine and 177 more in her remaining 8 full magazines. She had a defensive position with good cover, but limited routes of retreat, and somewhere in the valley below, 15 SEALs were counting on her to stay alive and keep shooting for 3 more minutes, until salvation arrived in the form of supersonic fighter jets, carrying enough ordnance to turn the tide of this entire engagement. 3 more minutes. Maya reacquired the closest member of the assault team through her scope, a bearded fighter at 120 meters, carrying an AK-47. Moving toward her position. With purposeful aggression, she placed her crosshair, center mass, and prepared to defend herself while simultaneously supporting the men in the valley who had no idea that the ghost providing their salvation was now fighting for her own survival against an enemy who wanted her dead almost as much as they wanted to kill the SEALs she was protecting. The bearded fighter at 120 meters was moving with the confident aggression of someone who believed his target was focused elsewhere, unaware of the immediate threat. That confidence died with him when Maya's bullet punched through his chest at a slight downward angle, the elevated firing position giving her a devastating shot that dropped him instantly. 17 rounds remaining in her current magazine. His partner, advancing from a different angle approximately 30 meters to the left, immediately recognized what had happened and dove behind a cluster of rocks. Maya shifted her aim, but the fighter was already in hard cover, only the top of his head occasionally visible as he tried to locate her exact position. She held her fire-wasting ammunition on a target she couldn't hit cleanly, would accomplish nothing except reveal her position more precisely. The remaining 2 members of the assault team had gone to ground, somewhere in the broken terrain below her rocky knob. Maya scanned methodically through her scope, searching for movement, for the distinctive shapes of human forms against the natural landscape, for anything that would give her a target. The problem with elevated defensive positions was that while they offered excellent fields of fire at distance, they created dead space at close range, areas directly below her position that she couldn't observe or engage without exposing herself. Dangerously. Her tactical situation had shifted from providing overwatch for the SEALs to fighting for her own survival. The assault team hunting her was now committed, too close to withdraw safely, forced to either kill her or die trying. She'd gained a temporary advantage by killing their lead man, but the remaining 3 were experienced fighters who understood cover, concealment, and how to assault a prepared position. Maya needed to make a decision: stay and defend her current position, or displace to alternate terrain before the assault team maneuvered close enough to overwhelm her with grenades or automatic weapons fire. Staying gave her the ability to continue supporting the SEALs, but risked being overrun. Displacing would preserve her life, but might arrive too late to prevent the enemy's next assault on the SEAL position. The decision was made for her when her radio crackled with Lieutenant Commander Cross's urgent voice: "All Vanguard elements. Enemy is initiating final assault from multiple directions. Western and southern approaches simultaneously. This is it. They're committing everything." Maya swung her rifle back toward the valley floor, scanning for the new threat. Through her scope, she could see what Cross was describing: approximately 25 to 30 fighters advancing on the SEAL position from 2 directions in a coordinated wave. The smoke had mostly dissipated now, giving her clear sight lines, but also revealing the desperate nature of the SEAL situation. 7 operational shooters with minimal ammunition facing a final assault by an enemy force that still outnumbered them 4 to 1. The enemy commander had timed this perfectly. He'd sent the assault team to suppress or kill Maya, then launched his final attack while she was distracted defending herself. It was tactically sound and brutally effective. If Maya focused on the assault team hunting her, the SEALs would be overrun. If she focused on supporting the SEALs, the assault team would kill her, and then she couldn't help anyone. Maya made her choice in the space between heartbeats. The assault team hunting her was 3 men who wanted her dead. The assault developing in the valley below was 30 men who would definitely kill 15 Americans if not stopped. The math was simple, even if the consequences were potentially fatal. She ignored the immediate threat to her own position and began engaging the Zindans. Assault on the SEAL perimeter, the western approach, showed the heaviest concentration, approximately 18 fighters advancing in a coordinated wave. Maya identified what appeared to be a squad leader, a man directing others forward while maintaining position behind the assault line. At 350 meters, she placed her crosshair on his torso and fired. He went down. The men nearest him hesitated, looking back to see what had happened to their leader. Maya exploited that hesitation ruthlessly. She engaged a fighter who'd been receiving orders from the fallen leader, dropping him at 345 meters. She shifted to another target, a man carrying an RPG-7 rocket launcher, a high-priority threat that could destroy the SEAL's remaining cover with a single well-placed shot. The RPG gunner collapsed at 358 meters, the rocket launcher falling unused. 14 rounds remaining in her magazine. Behind her, she heard the distinctive crack of a K-47 fire close, maybe 80 meters away. The assault team hunting her had recovered from their initial setback and was engaging her position with suppressive fire. Bullets whined off the rocks around her, sending stone chips flying, forcing her to keep her head down. She was now taking fire while trying to provide fire. A nearly impossible tactical situation, but impossible had stopped meaning anything about 15 minutes ago when she'd made the decision to disobey orders and enter this fight. Maya adjusted her position slightly, using the boulder for cover while maintaining the minimum exposure necessary to keep her rifle in action. She continued engaging targets in the valley, working through the assault element with methodical precision even as incoming rounds impacted around her position. A fighter advancing on the SEAL perimeter from the south went down at 425 meters. Another dropped at 390 meters. A third took a round through the shoulder and fell screaming. 11 rounds remaining in her magazine. Reaper 1-6 Vanguard actual. Cross's voice was nearly drowned out by the sound of gunfire in the background. We can see you taking fire. Disengage and save yourself. We'll hold as long as we can. Maya ignored him. She reacquired targets, fired, shifted, fired again. The western assault was faltering under her precision fire, fighters taking cover or pulling back as their leadership was systematically eliminated. But the southern assault continued advancing, and Maya could see fighters getting dangerously close to the SEAL perimeter, within 70 meters now. Close enough that grenades and accurate rifle fire would start taking a devastating toll. She shifted her focus to the southern approach, engaging a fighter at 520 meters who appeared to be directing the assault from a covered position. It was a difficult shot at extended range while taking incoming fire herself. She held high to compensate for bullet drop, adjusted for wind, and fired. The bullet impacted low and left a miss. 10 rounds remaining. More AK-47 fire from behind her position. Closer now, maybe 60 meters. The assault team was advancing under covering fire, using proper infantry tactics to close the distance. Maya had maybe 3 to 4 minutes before they reached grenade range, at which point her elevated position would become a death trap. She engaged another target. In the southern assault, a fighter sprinting toward the SEAL position. He dropped at 485 meters. She shifted to a second target, fired, missed as the fighter dove behind cover. 8 rounds remaining in her magazine. The southern assault was within 50 meters of the SEAL perimeter now. close enough that the SEAL's remaining grenades would be effective. She heard the distinctive crump of fragmentary grenades detonating, saw the flashes and smoke as the SEALs fought to keep the assault from breaching their perimeter. Machine gun fire, the distinctive sound of an M240 burning through its last belt of ammunition in sustained bursts that would empty the weapon in seconds. Maya continued firing. A target at 470 meters. Another at 455. The southern assault was taking casualties, but still advancing through sheer momentum and numerical superiority. She could kill them one at a time. But there were too many, advancing too fast. While she was simultaneously defending her own position against an assault team that was now close enough that she could hear them shouting to each other in PA, SHTO. Her magazine ran dry, 20 rounds expended. She conducted a tactical reload, dropping the empty magazine and inserting a fresh 20-rounder. 157 rounds remaining across 8 magazines. Movement to her right. One of the assault team members had flanked wide and was now at approximately 40 meters. Using a rocky outcrop for cover, preparing to rush her position. Maya swung her rifle around and engaged him the moment he broke cover. The range was point blank by sniper standards. Her bullet caught him center mass and he tumbled backward down the slope. 7 rounds remaining in her current magazine, but his movement had been a diversion. While she was engaging him, another member of the assault team had closed to 30 meters on her left flank. She heard the distinctive thump of a hand grenade being thrown, the sound every combat veteran learned to recognize and fear. Maya rolled away from her firing position as the grenade arced toward her location. She pressed herself against the largest boulder available and covered her head with her arms. The grenade detonated 3 meters from where she'd been positioned. The explosion hideously loud in the confined space of the rocky knob. Shrapnel screaming through the air and peppering the boulders around her with stone fragments. Her ears rang. Her vision swam. The concussive force had rattled her brain even through the protection of the boulder. But her hands still gripped her rifle and her body still functioned. Running on training and adrenaline when conscious thought was temporarily offline, she forced herself upright, reacquired her scope picture, and scanned for the grenade thrower. He was advancing now, using the smoke and confusion from the grenade to close the distance while she was presumably stunned. He was at 20 meters, a K-47 raised, moving fast. Maya's crosshair found him. At this range, she didn't need to calculate holds or compensate for wind. She simply placed the reticle on his chest and fired. He dropped. 6 rounds remaining. The third and final member of the assault team, the fighter who'd gone to ground after his partner was killed in the initial engagement, was nowhere visible. He was out there somewhere in the rocks below her position, possibly maneuvering for a shot, possibly calling for reinforcements, possibly waiting for her to expose herself. Maya didn't have time to hunt him. In the valley below, the SEAL position was being overrun. She swung her rifle back to the primary battle, scanning frantically for targets. The southern assault had reached the SEAL perimeter. She could see hand-to-hand fighting, could see muzzle flashes at danger close range, could see the desperate last stand developing as 7 wounded. Ammunition-depleted SEALs fought against 20 enemy fighters who'd finally closed to contact distance. Maya engaged a fighter at 40 meters. From the SEAL position close enough that she had to be extraordinarily careful about not hitting friendly forces. The fighter dropped. She shifted to another target at 35 meters, fired, and watched him fall. 4 rounds remaining in her magazine. Another target, this one grappling with what appeared to be SEAL operator in close combat. Maya couldn't take the shot without risking hitting the American. She shifted to a different target, a fighter raising his AK-47 to fire into the SEAL position at point-blank range. She shot him at 60 meters. 3 rounds remaining. Vanguard actual, Reaper 1-6. Maya's voice was hoarse, her ears still ringing from the grenade. I'm still in the fight. Where do you need fire? Cross's response came back breathless, punctuated by gunfire. Reaper, we've got enemy inside our perimeter. Close quarters. Watch your fire. I say again, watch your fire, danger close on all sides. The tactical situation had devolved into the nightmare scenario. Every sniper feared targets, mixed with friendly forces at close range, where precision fire was as likely to cause fratricide as to help. Maya scanned desperately for clear targets, for enemy fighters who were separated enough from SEL positions that she could engage safely. She found a fighter at 50 meters from the SEAL position, reloading his AK-47, preparing to re-engage. Maya shot him. 2 rounds remaining in her magazine. Another target, this one dragging a wounded fighter away from the SEAL perimeter, probably attempting to retrieve a casualty. Maya made a split-second judgment call. Retrieving wounded wasn't an immediate threat to the SEALs. She held fire and searched for more dangerous targets. Conservation of ammunition mattered now. Every round had to count. A fighter appeared at the edge of her scope's field of view, positioning himself behind cover 70 meters from the SEAL position, preparing to provide covering fire for others assaulting the perimeter. Maya engaged him. He dropped. 1 round remaining in her magazine. She conducted another tactical reload, her third of the engagement. 137 rounds remaining across 7 magazines. She was burning through ammunition faster than sustainable, but the tactical situation demanded maximum rate of fire. And then she heard it, a sound that changed everything. The distinctive roar of jet engines at high speed, growing louder by the second. The F-16s were arriving. Vanguard actual, all elements. A new voice on the radio, speaking with the calm authority of an Air Force pilot who controlled more firepower than everything else on this battlefield combined. This is Falcon 4-1 flight of 2 F-16s, checking in on station with full combat load. We have eyes on your position. Ready to provide close air support. Send your targets. Maya felt a wave of relief so intense it nearly buckled her knees. Air support. Finally, after 4 hours of desperate fighting. After hundreds of rounds expended, after casualties mounted and ammunition depleted. Salvation had arrived in the form of 2 fighter jets carrying precision-guided bombs and 20mm cannons that could obliterate enemy positions with devastating efficiency. Crosses. Voice came back immediately. Falcon 4-1, Vanguard actual. We are danger close with enemy forces. We have enemy inside our perimeter and on 3 surrounding ridgelines. We need immediate fire on the ridgeline positions to break their assault. Vanguard actual, Falcon 4-1 copies danger close. Stand by for gun runs on ridgeline positions. Keep your heads down, this is going to be loud. The first F-16 rolled in from the south, diving toward the northern ridgeline where the DSHK position had been, and where 20 to 30 fighters were still positioned. The aircraft's 20mm M61 Vulcan cannon opened up with a sound that defied description, a buzzsaw roar that sent hundreds of rounds downrange per second. Each round explosive tipped, each impact creating a small detonation. The northern ridgeline erupted in a line of explosions, marching across the terrain like the footsteps of an angry god. Rock shattered. Earth fountained into the air. Enemy fighters were torn apart or obliterated, or sent running in panic from positions that had been safe seconds before. The second F-16 followed immediately, engaging the western approach with another devastating gun run. More explosions, more destruction. More enemy positions transformed into smoking craters in seconds. The tactical situation transformed instantly. Enemy fighters who moments ago had been assaulting the SEAL position were now breaking contact, running, fleeing for their lives from an enemy they couldn't fight and couldn't hide from. The coordinated assault disintegrated into panicked retreat as survivors. abandoned their weapons, and ran for any cover they could find. Maya watched through her scope as the battlefield was systematically destroyed by American air power. The southern positions were hit next, then the western boulder field. Methodical targeting that left nothing but devastation. Within 3 minutes, an enemy force that had numbered 65 fighters and had nearly overrun 15 SEALs had been reduced to scattered survivors fleeing into the mountains. The battle was over. After 4 hours and 20 minutes of sustained combat, after hundreds of rounds fired and dozens of lives ended, after impossible decisions and desperate stands and violations of every rule that mattered, the battle was finally definitively over. Maya slumped behind her boulder, rifle still in her hands, body shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline crash. Her ears rang. Her hands trembled. Her mind struggled to process the transition from life or death combat to sudden, overwhelming victory. In the valley below, the SEALs were still alive. Wounded, depleted, traumatized, but alive. 15 men who should have died had survived, because air support finally arrived, and because one sniper had refused to follow orders that would have let them die. Maya keyed her radio one final time. Vanguard Actual, Reaper 1-6. Congratulations on staying alive. You did good down there. Cross's response came back after a long pause, his voice thick with emotion. Reaper 1-6, Vanguard Actual. We're alive because of you. Every single one of us knows that. Whatever happens next, whatever consequences you face, know that 15 families still have their husbands and fathers because you chose to help us. We won't forget that, ever. Maya didn't respond. There was nothing to say that mattered more than those words. She'd made her choice, paid her price, and achieved her objective. 15 men were alive. That was enough. The sound of helicopter rotors cut through the mountain air approximately 20 minutes after the F-16s had finished their devastating work. 2 UH-60 Black Hawks swept low over the ridgelines, their door gunners scanning for threats, their pilots navigating the treacherous terrain with practiced skill. Behind them came a smaller bird, a specialized medical evacuation helicopter with a red cross, marking visible even at distance. Maya remained in her position on the rocky knob, watching through her scope as the helicopters circled the SEAL position before landing in a hastily cleared area about 50 meters from their defensive perimeter. Dust and debris kicked up in massive clouds as the aircraft settled onto the uneven ground. Within seconds, medical personnel were rushing toward the SEAL position, carrying stretchers and emergency equipment. Her radio crackled with operational traffic as the evacuation unfolded, casualty reports being transmitted, medical priorities being established, coordination with the Kasivek bird about which wounded needed immediate surgical intervention. The professional military machine was now operating at full efficiency, delivering the support that should have been available hours ago but had arrived just barely in time. Maya conducted a tactical assessment of her own situation. She'd expended 83 rounds of ammunition across the engagement, more than a third of her combat load. Her position on the rocky knob was now known to any surviving enemy forces. The third member of the assault team that had attacked her was still unaccounted for, somewhere in the rocks below, potentially waiting for an opportunity. Her hands were scraped and bleeding from the climb and the close-quarters maneuvering. Her right shoulder ached from the rifle's recoil after dozens of rapid shots. Her ears still rang from the grenade detonation, but she was alive, functional, and still capable of defending herself if necessary. The larger problem was what came next. She disobeyed explicit orders from the Tactical Operations Center, violated mission parameters, engaged in unauthorized direct action, and cut off communications with her chain of command for nearly 30 minutes. The military didn't take such violations lightly, regardless of the outcome. Success didn't erase disobedience. It only made the consequences more complicated. Her radio still switched to the SEAL frequency, Transmitted Cross's voice. Reaper 1-6, Vanguard actual. Kasivek is on station. We're loading our wounded now. What's your status? Do you need extraction? Maya keyed her response. Vanguard actual, I'm mobile and operational. I'll make my way to the landing zone and extract with your element if there's room. I've got one enemy fighter still unaccounted for in my immediate area, the assault team that engaged my position. Recommend maintaining security during extraction. Copy, Reaper. We'll keep eyes out. The fast movers are maintaining overhead coverage and ground QRF is 15 minutes out. Get down here. We want to meet the person who saved our lives. Maya began her descent from the rocky knob, moving carefully with her rifle at the ready, scanning constantly for the missing fighter. The terrain that had favored her during the engagement now worked against her. The same rocks and dead space that had concealed enemy approaches could hide an ambush. She moved tactically, using cover, pausing to scan before crossing open areas. Maintaining 360-degree awareness. She found the body of the fighter she'd killed at 20 meters, the one who'd rushed her position after the grenade explosion. His AK-47 lay nearby, along with 2 additional magazines and another fragmentation grenade. Maya secured the weapon and ammunition, performing a combat search that was standard procedure when moving through areas with enemy casualties. You never knew what intelligence might be recovered from documents, phones, or personal effects. 10 meters further down, she found the second body, the bearded fighter who'd been leading the assault team. He carried a radio, which Maya collected, along with his identification documents and a cell phone. The radio and phone would provide intelligence value, potentially revealing enemy communications and coordination methods. The third fighter remained missing. Maya spent 5 minutes conducting a careful search of the immediate area but found no sign of him. He'd either successfully escaped during the chaos of the airstrikes or was hunkered down in cover waiting for an opportunity. Either way, she couldn't spend more time hunting him. The SEALs needed to extract, and she needed to be with them when they did. Maya continued her descent toward the valley floor, covering the remaining distance in 15 minutes of careful movement. As she approached the SEAL position, she could see the full scope of the battle's aftermath. The area looked like a war zone, which it had been. Spent brass casings littered the ground by the thousands. Crater impacts from RPG rounds and grenades scarred the earth. Blood stained the rocks. Bodies of enemy fighters lay scattered around the perimeter. Testimony to the desperate close-quarters fighting that had nearly overwhelmed the SEAL defense. The SEALs themselves were a study in combat exhaustion. Even from a distance, Maya could see the 1,000-yard stares, the slumped postures, the mechanical movements of men who'd expended everything they had and were running on fumes. Several sat against rocks, heads hanging, weapons across their laps. Others were helping load wounded onto stretchers. The Kasivek helicopter's rotors were already spinning, preparing for immediate departure with the most critically wounded. As Maya approached the perimeter, one of the SEAL operators, a massive man with a full beard and plate carrier covered in ammunition pouches, spotted her and called out, "Got someone approaching from the north. Looks like civilian clothes? No, white U.S. uniform, no unit markings. Single individual with rifle. Lieutenant Commander Cross, his left leg bandaged and his shoulder wrapped but still mobile, moved to intercept her approach." As Maya came into clear view, she saw his expression shift from cautious alertness to something approaching awe. "You're Reaper 1-6? Cross's voice carried disbelief. "You're Staff Sergeant, I apologize, but I was expecting someone male." Maya finished for him, allowing the faintest hint of a smile. "I get that a lot. Staff Sergeant Maya Reeves, attached to JSOC Special Reconnaissance Element. I was your overwatch on this operation." Cross extended his hand, which Maya shook. His grip was firm despite his injuries, his eyes intense as he studied her face. "Ma'am, I've been doing this job for 12 years, and I've never seen shooting like what you did today. The precision, the target selection, the sustained fire under pressure, that was masterclass level work." Other SEAL operators were gathering now, forming a loose circle around Maya and Cross. She could feel their eyes on her, assessing, measuring, trying to reconcile what they'd experienced with the person standing before them. She was accustomed to the reaction of 5'6" woman in her early 30s wasn't. What most people pictured when they thought of combat. Snipers who could change entire battles through precision fire. The senior enlisted man who'd taken tactical command when Cross was wounded stepped forward. His name tape read Chun, and his weathered face showed 20 years of hard service. "Staff Sergeant, I'm Senior Chief Marcus Chen. I counted at least 15 enemy kills from your position, probably more that we couldn't confirm. You disrupted 2 major assaults, eliminated their heavy weapons position, and kept engaging even when you were taking fire yourself. That's the kind of support we train our whole careers hoping to get and almost never receive." Maya nodded acknowledgement, but kept her response professional. "I did what the tactical situation required. Senior Chief, you and your team did the hard work holding that position for 4 hours. Against those odds took exceptional discipline and courage. Hard work that would have ended in 15 body bags if you hadn't violated orders to help us," Cross interjected. "We monitored the command frequency before we switched to tactical comms. We heard the talk explicitly order you to maintain position and not engage. You chose to come anyway." The statement hung in the air between them. Maya met Cross's eyes steadily. "I made a tactical judgment based on real-time information. The talk didn't have the complete picture of your situation. I did. The decision was mine to make, and I made it. And now you'll face court-martial for it," Cross said quietly. "Article 92 failure to obey lawful order. That's career-ending, potentially dishonorable discharge. Possibly even confinement." Maya had been avoiding thinking about those specific consequences, but hearing them articulated made them real and immediate. 15 years of service, a spotless record, multiple commendations, all about to be destroyed by one day's choices. Her daughter Emma's face flashed through her mind, the college fund, the stable life, the promise to always come home. What had she done to all of that? But then she looked at the men around her. 7 operational SEAL operators who were standing because she'd helped them. 5 wounded men being loaded onto helicopters who were alive because she disrupted enemy assaults. 3 KIA casualties that had occurred before she'd entered the fight. Men she couldn't save but whose deaths had motivated her to ensure no more joined them. 15 lives. 15 families who would have received flag-draped coffins and condolence letters if she'd followed orders and stayed in her observation post. "Whatever consequences I face, they're worth it," Maya said simply. "You're alive. Your families will see you again. That matters more than my career." Senior Chief Chun's expression softened slightly. "Ma'am, you should know we're going to fight for you. Every one of us will testify to what happened here. We'll explain the tactical situation. We'll make sure the brass understands that you saved 15 lives when the official channels failed us." Cross nodded agreement. "We document everything. Helmet cameras, after-action reports, witness statements. The record will show exactly what happened, that we were being overrun. That support was too far away, that you made the only decision that could save us. That has to count for something." "Maybe," Maya allowed. "Or maybe it just makes for a more complicated court-martial. The military doesn't love subordinates who decide they know better than their commanders, even when they're right." The Kasivek helicopter lifted off, carrying the most critically wounded towards surgical facilities. The remaining Black Hawks would extract the rest of the Team 7 operational SEALs, 2 less seriously wounded, Maya herself, and whatever captured enemy equipment and intelligence they could carry. The ground QRF was arriving to secure the site and conduct battle damage assessment. One of the younger SEAL operators, his face still showing the adrenaline crash of combat, spoke up. "Staff Sergeant, I'm Petty Officer Jake Rodriguez. I was one of the urgent surgical cases, took shrapnel to the abdomen in the first hour of fighting. Your fire support bought time for our medic to stabilize me. Doc said I had maybe 45 minutes before I bled out internally. You gave me those 45 minutes. I've got a wife and a 2-year-old daughter who still have a husband and father, because you decided their lives mattered more than your career." Maya felt her throat tighten. She'd been operating on professional detachment, on tactical focus, on the mental discipline that lets snipers kill at distance without dwelling on the human implications. But Rodriguez's words, his mention of the wife and daughter, broke through that detachment. These weren't abstract tactical problems she'd solved. These were human beings with families and futures who existed because of choices she'd made. "I'm glad you're alive." "Petty Officer," was all she could manage. The senior SEAL medic, his name tape read, Sullivan, approached carrying a medical kit. "Staff Sergeant, you're bleeding from multiple locations and showing signs of minor traumatic brain injury from that grenade. Let me check you out before we extract." Maya hadn't realized how much damage she'd taken during the engagement. Now that Sullivan mentioned it, she became aware of the pounding headache, the dried blood on her hands and forearms, the various scrapes and contusions from climbing and maneuvering under fire. She allowed Sullivan to conduct his examination, answering his questions about dizziness, vision problems, and cognitive function. "You're concussed but functional," Sullivan concluded. "No signs of serious TBI, but you'll need proper evaluation once we're back at base. The lacerations are minor. You got lucky with that grenade any closer, and we'd be having a very different conversation." The word lucky felt inappropriate given the circumstances, but Maya understood his meaning. She'd survived combat that should have killed her, had maintained functionality despite injuries and exhaustion, had accomplished an impossible mission through a combination of skill and fortune. The remaining Black Hawks set down, their crews coordinating the extraction. Cross organized his team with the practiced efficiency of a seasoned officer, ensuring the wounded were prioritized. Weapons and sensitive equipment were accounted for. Nothing of intelligence value was left behind. As they prepared to board, Cross pulled Maya aside. "Staff Sergeant, when we get back to base, things are going to move fast. The TOC already knows you disobeyed orders. They've been trying to raise you on the command frequency for the past hour. There will be an immediate investigation. You'll probably be confined to quarters pending formal charges. It's going to get ugly before it gets better." Maya nodded. She'd been expecting this. "Understood, sir. I'll cooperate fully with any investigation. I won't try to minimize what I did or claim I was following some interpretation of orders. I disobeyed. I knew I was disobeying, and I'd make the same choice again under the same circumstances. That honesty is going to hurt you legally," Cross warned. "Any defense attorney would tell you to shut up and let them build a case around extenuating circumstances or ambiguous orders. I'm not interested in legal maneuvering," Maya replied. "I made my choice with open eyes. I'll stand behind it." Cross studied her for a long moment, his expression mixing respect and concern. "You're either the most principled soldier I've ever met or the most stubborn. Possibly both." He paused. "For what it's worth, if I'm ever in an impossible situation again, I hope someone exactly like you is watching my back and willing to make the hard calls." They boarded the Black Hawk, Maya taking a seat along the canvas bench next to Senior Chief Chun. The helicopter lifted off, the valley dropping away below them, the battlefield receding into distance. From altitude, Maya could see the full scope of the engagement, the SEAL position, the surrounding enemy positions now destroyed by airstrikes, the rocky knob where she'd made her stand, the bodies scattered across the landscape. 4 hours and 20 minutes of combat, condensed into a topographical view that looked almost peaceful from helicopter altitude. But Maya would remember every shot, every decision, every moment when 15 lives hung in the balance and she'd chosen to act rather than comply. The helicopter banked toward the main operating base, carrying 15 men who'd survived impossible odds and one woman who'd saved them at the cost of everything she'd built over 15 years of service. The flight time was 30 minutes. Maya spent it in silence, her rifle across her lap, her mind already preparing for the investigation, the charges, the court-martial that would determine whether saving 15 lives was worth destroying one career. She thought about Emma, about explaining to an 8-year-old why mommy might be going to prison for doing the right thing. She thought about her parents who'd been so proud when she enlisted, who'd supported her through multiple deployments, who would now watch their daughter face potential dishonorable discharge. But mostly she thought about Rodriguez's wife and 2-year-old daughter who still had a husband and father. About the families of 14 other men who would get to hold their loved ones again. About the funerals that wouldn't happen, the flag-draped coffins that wouldn't be presented, the grief that wouldn't devastate entire households. 15 families. That was the price of her disobedience. And looking at it from that perspective, Maya couldn't bring herself to regret a single shot she'd fired. The Black Hawk touched down at Forward Operating Base Sentinel at 15:47 hours, the rotors still spinning. As medical personnel rushed forward with stretchers and equipment, Maya watched as the SEAL team's wounded were carefully transferred to waiting ambulances, each man receiving immediate triage before being rushed to the base medical facility. The precision and efficiency of the operation stood in stark contrast to the chaos of the battlefield they'd just left. As Maya stepped off the helicopter, her boots hitting the concrete landing pad, she found herself immediately surrounded by military police. 4 MPs in full kit, their expressions professionally neutral, their hands resting near their sidearms. The senior among them, a staff sergeant with Torres on his name tape, stepped forward. Staff Sergeant Maya Reeves? His voice was formal, clipped. That's correct. Ma'am, I'm placing you under military apprehension, pending investigation into violations of direct orders and unauthorized combat operations. You're to surrender your weapon and accompany us to the Provost Marshal's office immediately. You have the right to remain silent. Any statement you make may be used against you in court-martial proceedings. Do you understand these rights? Maya unslung her SR-25 and handed it to one of the MPs, along with her remaining magazines of ammunition, her sidearm, and her combat knife. The systematic removal of her weapons felt like being stripped of her identity. Each piece of equipment represented years of training, thousands of hours of practice, the tools that defined her as a sniper and a soldier. I understand my rights, Staff Sergeant, Maya replied calmly. I'll cooperate fully. Behind her, she heard Lieutenant Commander Cross's voice, sharp with anger. Staff Sergeant Torres, the soldier just saved 15 American lives. She deserves better treatment than being arrested like a criminal on the landing pad. Torres didn't turn, maintaining his focus on Maya. Sir, I'm following orders from the Provost Marshal and the base commander. Staff Sergeant Reeves violated explicit directives from the Tactical Operations Center. The circumstances are under investigation, but the violation itself is documented. I have my orders. Your orders are bullshit, Senior Chief Chun interjected, his voice carrying the authority of 2 decades of service. You're arresting a hero while the men she saved are still bleeding on stretchers 20 feet away. How does that serve justice? Senior Chief, I understand your position, but I have my orders, Torres repeated. He gestured to Maya. Ma'am, if you'll come with us. Maya looked back at the SEAL team one final time. Cross stood supported by 2 teammates, his leg injury preventing him from moving quickly. Chun's face was flushed with anger. The other operators wore expressions mixing outrage and helplessness. They'd survived a 4-hour firefight but couldn't prevent the military justice system from grinding forward. "It's all right," Maya said quietly. "This was always going to happen. Focus on your wounded. Make sure everyone gets proper medical care. We'll sort out the rest later." She turned and walked with the MPs toward a waiting vehicle, her back straight, her head up, maintaining the military bearing that had been drilled into her through 15 years of service. She refused to be led away like a prisoner, refused to show shame or defeat. She'd made her choice with full knowledge of the consequences. Now she'd face those consequences with the same discipline she'd applied to everything else in her military career. The Provost Marshal's office was a prefabricated building on the far side of the base. Its stark interior, all government-issue furniture and fluorescent lighting. Maya was processed like any other detainee, personal effects cataloged and secured. Fingerprints recorded. Photographs taken from multiple angles. The administrative machinery of military justice was impersonal and thorough. She was placed in a small holding room, not quite a cell, but close enough. A metal table bolted to the floor, 2 chairs, cinder block walls painted institutional beige. A single barred window looking out onto a gravel lot. A guard was posted outside the door. Maya was left alone with her thoughts and the growing realization of how comprehensively her life was about to change. 90 minutes later, the door opened and a lieutenant colonel entered, a JAG officer. Based on his insignia, carrying a briefcase and wearing the expression of someone dealing with a particularly complicated legal problem. He was in his mid-40s, with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that suggested extensive field experience before transitioning to legal work. "Staff Sergeant Reeves, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hendricks, Judge Advocate General's Corps. I've been assigned as the investigating officer for your case." He sat across from her, opening his briefcase and extracting a thick folder of documents. "Before we proceed, I need to confirm you understand your rights. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to legal representation. Anything you say can and will be used in court-martial proceedings. Do you understand these rights?" "Yes, sir." "Do you wish to have an attorney present before making any statements?" Maya considered the question. Legal counsel would probably advise her to say nothing, to let them build a case around technical defenses and procedural arguments. But Maya had no interest in hiding behind legal technicalities. She'd made her decision consciously and would defend it on its merits, not through lawyerly maneuvering. "No, sir. I'll answer your questions." Hendricks studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Staff Sergeant, I've reviewed the preliminary reports from the Tactical Operations Center. The facts are straightforward. At approximately 11:30 hours, you were given explicit orders to maintain your observation position and not engage enemy forces. At approximately 11:45 hours, you acknowledged those orders, then immediately cut off communications and moved to engage. Is that accurate?" "Yes, sir." "You understood these were direct orders from your chain of command?" "Yes, sir." The talk actual made it explicitly clear that I was ordered to maintain position and that engaging would violate mission parameters. "And yet you chose to disobey those orders and engage enemy forces anyway?" "Yes, sir." Hendricks made notes on his legal pad. "Staff Sergeant, do you understand that what you're describing constitutes a clear violation of Article 92 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, failure to obey lawful orders? This is one of the most serious charges a soldier can face." "I understand, sir." "Then help me understand your thinking. Why did you choose to disobey explicit orders from your commanding officer?" Maya took a breath, organizing her thoughts. This was the moment to articulate what had driven her decision, to explain the reasoning that had seemed so clear on that mountain, but might sound like rationalization in this sterile office. "Sir, my orders were to provide observation and reconnaissance for the SEAL operation. The broader mission, the commander's intent was to support, Special Operations Forces in eliminating high-value targets. When the SEAL element was ambushed and facing imminent danger of being overrun, the tactical situation had changed fundamentally from what was briefed. Go on. The TOC was operating with incomplete information. They knew the SEALs were in contact, but they didn't have my ground-level perspective of just how dire the situation was. I could see the enemy force strength, could see the SEAL casualties mounting, could calculate that official support would not arrive in time. I had the capability to intervene elevated position, precision rifle, clear fields of fire, and the training to employ them effectively. Hendricks leaned back in his chair. So you're arguing that you had better information than your commanders and therefore were justified in substituting your judgment for theirs? No, sir. I'm arguing that I had real-time tactical information they didn't have, and that in a rapidly evolving combat situation, someone on the ground needed to make a decision. The choice was simple: follow orders and watch 15 Americans die, or violate orders and potentially save them. I chose saving lives. That's a dangerous precedent, Staff Sergeant. If every soldier decides they can disobey orders whenever they personally judge the situation requires it, we lose cohesion, discipline, and the chain of command that makes military operations possible. I agree, sir. Which is why I'm not claiming general authority to disobey orders. I'm saying that in this specific situation, with these specific circumstances, I made a judgment call. I knew I was violating orders. I knew there would be consequences. I accepted both facts and acted anyway because I believed and still believe that saving 15 lives was worth the cost to my career. Hendricks studied her for a long moment. You're not helping your legal defense by being so forthright about intentional disobedience. I'm not interested in legal defense based on technicalities or claiming I misunderstood orders, sir. I did exactly what I'm accused of doing. I did it deliberately, with full knowledge of the consequences, and I'd do it again under the same circumstances. That's the truth, and I'm not going to twist it into something else to avoid responsibility. The JAG officer made more notes, his expression thoughtful. Staff Sergeant, I've been practicing military law for 16 years. I've seen every kind of defense, every rationalization, every attempt to minimize culpability. You single quotes read ... unusual. Most people in your position would be desperately trying to avoid court-martial, not calmly admitting to deliberate violations. Most people in my position didn't watch 15 Americans about to die while holding the capability to save them. Sir, Hendricks closed his folder and leaned forward. Off the record, and I want to emphasize this is off the record, what you did was extraordinary. The preliminary combat reports indicate you eliminated between 15 and 20 enemy combatants, disrupted multiple assault attempts, and maintained effective fire even while under direct attack yourself. That's the kind of combat performance that normally earns medals, not court-martial charges. But I violated orders to achieve it, Maya finished. Exactly. Which creates an impossible situation for the command structure. They can't ignore the violation without essentially endorsing insubordination. But they also can't court-martial a soldier who saved 15 lives without looking callous and bureaucratic. You've created a political and legal nightmare. Maya allowed herself a slight smile. Not intentionally, sir. I was just trying to keep people alive. I believe you. But intention doesn't change the legal facts. Hendricks gathered his papers. Here's what happens next. You'll remain in restricted quarters pending completion of the investigation. I'll interview all relevant witnesses, the SEAL team, the talker personnel, your command chain. I'll review all available evidence, radio transcripts, after-action reports, everything. Then I'll make a recommendation to the commanding general about whether to proceed to court-martial. How long does that process take? Usually 2 to 3 weeks. Given the high visibility of this case and the political sensitivities involved, possibly longer. He stood to leave, then paused. Staff Sergeant, I want you to understand something. The SEAL team you saved is already mobilizing support for you. Lieutenant Commander Cross has been in contact with his command chain. They're preparing statements, collecting evidence, building a case that you should be commended rather than charged. You have powerful advocates. Will that matter, sir? Hendrix's expression turned somber. Honestly, I don't know. The military takes order discipline very seriously, especially in combat situations. But it also values results and protecting American lives. This case is going to force some very senior officers to make very difficult decisions about which principle matters more. He left, and Maya was escorted to her temporary quarters, a small room in the transient barracks. More comfortable than the holding cell, but still effectively confinement. She wasn't permitted to leave without escort, couldn't communicate with anyone outside the base, had her computer and phone access restricted. She was in legal limbo, neither charged nor cleared. Her entire future depended on decisions being made in offices she couldn't access by officers she'd never met. The first 48 hours passed in isolation and uncertainty. Maya's meals were delivered by MPs. Her only visitors were legal personnel asking follow-up questions. She had no contact with the SEAL team, no information about how they were recovering, no updates on the investigation's progress. On the third day, she received an unexpected visitor. An Army colonel in dress uniform, his chest decorated with multiple rows of ribbons, including a silver star and several Purple Hearts. His name tape read Patterson, and his bearing suggested extensive combat experience and senior command authority. Staff Sergeant Reeves, he said without preamble. I'm Colonel James Patterson, Commander of Joint Special Operations Task Force West. I'm here to discuss your situation. Maya stood at attention. Yes, sir. At ease, Staff Sergeant. This is an informal conversation. Patterson sat, gesturing for Maya to do the same. I've spent the past 3 days reviewing everything about Operation Righteous Saber, the planning, the intelligence, the execution, and the aftermath. I've read every radio transcript, watched every piece of helmet camera footage, interviewed every witness. I wanted to understand exactly what happened in that valley. Yes, sir. What happened was a catastrophic intelligence failure that put 15 of our best operators into a prepared ambush that should have killed them all. The intelligence about enemy force strength was wrong. The assessment of Wardak's location was wrong. The security evaluation was wrong. Everything about the operation was based on faulty assumptions, and it nearly cost us an entire SEAL team. Maya said nothing, waiting for him to continue. The official support structure failed those men. Air support was delayed due to coordination issues with Pakistani airspace. Ground QRF was too far away due to operational tempo and resource allocation. The Kasivat birds couldn't insert into a hot LZ. Every system and protocol we have in place to protect our operators failed simultaneously. Those men should have died, Staff Sergeant. By every reasonable calculation, they should have been overrun and killed. But they weren't, sir. No, they weren't. Because one staff sergeant with a sniper rifle decided that following orders was less important than saving lives. You operated without authorization, violated explicit directives, and engaged in direct action that was specifically prohibited by your mission parameters. Patterson's expression was unreadable. You also displayed extraordinary tactical judgment, exceptional marksmanship under combat stress, and the moral courage to make an impossible decision. The SEAL team commander estimates you killed or wounded between 18 and 22 enemy combatants. You disrupted 3 separate assault attempts. You maintained effective fire for over 30 minutes while simultaneously defending your own position against direct attack. Maya felt her heart pounding. She couldn't tell from Patterson's tone whether this conversation was leading to commendation or court-martial. Sir, I understand I violated orders. I'm prepared to accept the consequences of that violation. But I want to be clear, I don't regret my actions. If placed in the same situation again, I would make the same choice. Patterson studied her for a long moment. That's what concerns me most, Staff Sergeant. Not that you violated orders once, but that you're stating you'd do it again. That suggests a pattern of prioritizing your personal judgment over lawful commands. How can the military function if soldiers feel empowered to disobey whenever they personally disagree with orders? The question hung in the air between them, the fundamental tension at the heart of Maya's case. She took a breath and chose her words carefully. Sir, I'm not claiming general authority to disobey orders. I'm not suggesting that soldiers should routinely substitute their judgment for their commanders. But I am saying that in extreme situations, when lives are immediately at stake and official channels have failed, someone has to make the call. In that valley, I was the only person in position to help. I had seconds to decide, not hours to consult or request guidance. I made the best decision I could with the information available. If that makes me unsuitable for military service, then I'll accept that judgment. But I can't pretend I would choose differently. Patterson stood, his expression still unreadable. Staff Sergeant Reeves, your case has created significant controversy at the highest levels of command. There are officers arguing you should face court-martial as a warning against future insubordination. There are others arguing you should be decorated for exceptional valor. The debate is intense and political. I understand, sir. The investigation will continue. Lieutenant Colonel Hendricks will complete his report. A decision will be made about how to proceed. Until then, you remain in restricted status. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Off the record, Staff Sergeant, I've commanded Special Operations Forces for 12 years. I've sent hundreds of soldiers into combat and made thousands of tactical decisions. If I ever find myself in an impossible situation, I hope someone exactly like you is watching and willing to make the hard call, regardless of the consequences. He left without waiting for a response, leaving Maya alone with the realization that her fate was still completely uncertain. Powerful voices were arguing both sides, and she had no control over the outcome. All she could do was wait for judgment and hope that saving 15 lives would ultimately count for more than breaking 15 years worth of rules. The investigation stretched across 23 days of confinement, testimony, and mounting uncertainty. Maya spent her time in restricted quarters reading, exercising within the limited space available, and replaying the engagement in her mind, analyzing every decision, every shot, every moment when she might have acted differently. But no matter how many times she reviewed the tactical situation, she arrived at the same conclusion: she'd made the only choice she could live with. On day 12 of confinement, she was permitted her first visitor from outside the investigation. Emma arrived with Maya's mother, Sarah, who had flown from California the moment she learned about her daughter's situation. The reunion took place in a supervised visiting room, with an MP stationed at the door, maintaining professional distance, but clearly monitoring the interaction. Emma ran to her mother the moment the door opened, wrapping small arms around Maya's waist with the fierce desperation of an 8-year-old who didn't fully understand why mommy couldn't come home. Maya held her daughter close, breathing the scent of children's shampoo and playground dust, feeling tears she'd successfully suppressed for nearly 2 weeks threatening to break. Through her carefully maintained composure, "Mommy, why can't you come home?" Emma's voice was muffled against Maya's uniform. "Grandma says you're helping with important work, but you've been gone so long." Maya looked over her daughter's head at her mother, whose expression mixed concern, pride, and barely contained anger at the military system that had put her daughter in this position. Sarah was 62 years old, a retired school principal with steel-gray hair and the kind of moral backbone that Maya had inherited and that had ultimately led to her current predicament. I made some difficult choices during my job. Sweetheart, Maya said carefully, kneeling to Emma's eye level. Sometimes adults have to make decisions that have complicated consequences. I did what I thought was right, but now some people need to decide if they agree with my choices. Are you in trouble? Emma's green eyes, so like Maya's own, were wide with concern. Maybe, we're still figuring that out. But you didn't do anything bad, right? You're not a bad person? Maya felt her throat tighten. No, baby. I'm not a bad person. I helped some people who really needed help. But I had to break some rules to do it, and now we need to figure out what happens because of that. After Emma was taken to get ice cream from the base commissary, giving Maya and her mother privacy to talk, Sarah's carefully maintained composure cracked. Maya Elizabeth Reeves, what possessed you to throw away 15 years of service? Your career, your retirement, Emma's future, you risked everything. I saved 15 lives, Mom. And I'm proud of you for that. I am, but did it have to cost you everything? Couldn't you have found another way? Maya shook her head. There was no other way. Air support was too far out. Ground reinforcements were too slow. Those men had minutes before they were overrun. I was the only person in position to help, and I had the training and equipment to make a difference. The choice was save them and face consequences, or follow orders and watch them die. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her hands folded in her lap, her expression troubled. Finally, she spoke quietly. Your father would have made the same choice. He always said that rules exist to serve people, not the other way around. That when following rules means letting people die, the rules are wrong, not the person who breaks them. Maya's father had been a firefighter, killed in the line of duty when she was 17. His death running into a burning building to save a family trapped on the 3rd floor had inspired Maya's military service. He'd made the choice to risk everything to save lives, just as she had. The parallel wasn't lost on her. Dad never had to face court-martial for his choices, Maya said softly. No, but he died for them. At least you're still alive, still able to be Emma's mother, still able to eventually move forward from this. That has to count for something. The visit ended too quickly, with Emma clutching her mother one more time, extracting a promise that Maya would come home as soon as she was allowed, leaving Maya alone again with her thoughts and her uncertain future. On day 18, Lieutenant Colonel Hendricks returned with an update. His expression was professionally neutral, giving nothing away as he sat across from Maya in the same interview room where their first meeting had occurred. Staff Sergeant Reeves, the investigation is nearly complete. I've compiled testimony from 42 witnesses, reviewed hundreds of pages of documentation, analyzed all available evidence. I'm preparing my final report and recommendation to the commanding general. What will you recommend, sir? Hendricks hesitated, choosing his words carefully. That's not something I'm prepared to discuss before the report is finalized. But I can tell you that the evidence presents a complex picture. Your violation of direct orders is unambiguous and well documented. Your tactical performance during the engagement was exceptional by any standard. The outcome, 15 lives saved, is undeniable. How those factors balance against each other is ultimately a command decision, not a legal one. Am I going to face court-martial? That's the commanding general's decision, not mine. My role is to provide him with a complete investigation and my professional recommendation. He'll make the final determination about how to proceed. 4 days later, on day 22 of confinement, Maya was summoned to the base commander's office. She dressed in her service uniform, ensuring every detail was correct, cover positioned properly, ribbons aligned perfectly, boots polished to a mirror shine. If this was to be her final official appearance as a United States Army soldier, she would meet it with the same professional standards she'd maintained throughout her career. The base commander was Major General Robert Thornton. a career infantry officer with extensive combat experience and a reputation as a hard but fair leader. His office was decorated with unit photographs, deployment maps, and the accumulated memorabilia of 30 years of service. Behind his desk hung a quote from General George Patton: "A good plan violently executed now is better than a perfect plan executed next week." Thornton gestured for Maya to sit, then spent several moments reviewing papers on his desk, letting the silence stretch. It was a command technique Maya recognized, allowing tension to build before delivering important information. Finally, he looked up, his weathered face unreadable. "Staff Sergeant Reeves, I've reviewed Lieutenant Colonel Hendrix's investigation, along with input from multiple command levels up to and including Joint Special Operations Command. I've read statements from the SEAL team, from your chain of command, from the Tactical Operations Center personnel. I've studied the tactical timeline, the radio transcripts, the after-action reports. I've spent considerable time wrestling with the precedent this case sets and the message any decision sends to the force." Maya sat at attention, her hands folded in her lap, her expression neutral despite the anxiety churning in her gut. "Your violation of direct orders is unambiguous. You were explicitly commanded to maintain your observation position and not engage. You acknowledged that order, then immediately violated it. Under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, that constitutes a clear violation of Article 92. The law doesn't care about outcomes, it cares about obedience to lawful orders." Maya's heart sank. This was the preamble to court-martial charges. "However," Thornton continued, his tone shifting slightly, "the law also recognizes that combat situations involve judgment, that real-time decisions must account for factors that rear echelon commanders cannot fully appreciate, and that the ultimate purpose of military force is protecting American lives, not mindless adherence to protocols." He stood and walked to the window overlooking the base, his back to Maya as he continued speaking. 15 Special Operations personnel are alive because you chose to violate orders. 15 families still have their loved ones. 15 highly trained, irreplaceable warriors remain available for future missions. That outcome cannot be dismissed or minimized, regardless of the legal technicalities involved. He turned back to face her. "The SEAL team has submitted formal testimony describing your actions as the finest example of precision fire support they've witnessed in their careers. Lieutenant Commander Cross personally recommended you for the Silver Star. Other team members have written statements describing specific moments when your fire prevented them from being overrun. The tactical evidence supports every claim you eliminated approximately 20 enemy combatants, disrupted multiple assault attempts, and maintained effective fire while simultaneously defending your own position against direct attack." Maya said nothing, afraid to interrupt, uncertain where this was leading. "Colonel Patterson has recommended that no charges be filed, and that you instead receive formal recognition for exceptional valor in combat. The SEAL team's commanding officer concurs. Multiple Special Operations senior leaders have weighed in supporting this recommendation. They argue that court-martialing a soldier who saved 15 lives sends exactly the wrong message about initiative, tactical judgment, and moral courage." Thornton returned to his desk and sat heavily. "Conversely, your immediate chain of command argues that failing to charge you sets a dangerous precedent. They contend that if soldiers believe they can disobey orders whenever they personally judge the situation warrants it, we lose the discipline and cohesion that makes military operations possible. They argue that success doesn't excuse insubordination, that the ends don't justify the means, and that you should face court-martial as a deterrent to future violations." The general fell silent, studying Maya's face. "Staff Sergeant Reeves, before I announce my decision, I want to hear from you directly. Not your legal position, not your tactical justification. I've read all of that. I want to know, do you believe you were right to disobey orders?" Maya met his eyes steadily. Yes, sir. I believe I was right. Even knowing the consequences, the precedent it sets, the message it sends. Yes, sir. Because the alternative was watching 15 Americans die when I had the capability to save them. I understand the arguments about discipline and chain of command. I understand the concern about precedent. But in that moment, on that mountain, the choice wasn't between order and chaos. It was between lives and protocols. I chose lives. I'd make that choice again. Thornton nodded slowly. That's what I expected you'd say. It's also what makes this decision so difficult. He picked up a folder from his desk. I've decided not to pursue court-martial charges. Maya felt a wave of relief so intense it made her lightheaded. But Thornton held up a hand. However, you will receive a formal letter of reprimand that will become part of your permanent record. That letter will document that you violated direct orders during combat operations. It will note that while the outcome was positive, the violation itself cannot be condoned or ignored. This reprimand will likely end any possibility of further promotion and may impact your ability to hold sensitive assignments in the future. He slid the folder across the desk. Additionally, you're being reassigned from Special Operations Reconnaissance to a training command position. You'll serve as a senior sniper instructor at Fort Moore, teaching advanced marksmanship and tactical decision-making to the next generation of Army snipers. This assignment recognizes your exceptional technical skills while removing you from situations where similar judgment calls might be required. Maya absorbed the information, trying to process the mixed nature of the outcome. Not court-martialed, that was better than she'd hoped. But permanently reprimanded, career effectively capped. Removed from operational assignments, significant consequences that would follow her for the rest of her service. Do you understand the terms of this resolution, Staff Sergeant? Yes, sir. Do you accept them? Maya considered the question. She could refuse, demand her right to court-martial, force the military to publicly prosecute her for saving lives. But that would be pure spite, serving no purpose except to create more controversy and drag the SEAL team through additional scrutiny. I accept, sir. Thornton stood, extending his hand. Maya rose and shook it, feeling the firm grip of a commander who'd clearly struggled with this decision. Staff Sergeant Reeves, I want you to understand something. This outcome isn't about whether you were right or wrong. It's about balance, acknowledging your violation while recognizing your valor, maintaining discipline while honoring the lives you saved. The military is imperfect, and sometimes our solutions reflect that imperfection. I understand, sir. Your training assignment begins in 30 days. You'll have time to settle your affairs here, process out of Special Operations Command, and relocate to Fort Moore. Dismissed. Maya saluted and turned to leave. But Thornton's voice stopped her at the door. Staff Sergeant? Off the record, what you did was extraordinary. The reprimand in your file doesn't change that. 15 families owe you a debt they can never repay. Don't let the paperwork make you forget that. Maya nodded, unable to trust her voice, and left the office. She was met outside by Lieutenant Commander Cross, who'd been waiting in the corridor despite still recovering from his injuries. His expression was anxious, searching her face for information. Well? No court-martial. Letter of reprimand. Reassignment to training command. Cross's face showed relief mixed with frustration. That's better than it could have been. But still bullshit that you're being punished at all for saving our lives. It's the compromise that lets everyone save face, Maya said quietly. The command structure maintains its authority, and I get to keep my career, even if it's limited. I can live with that. We're not done fighting for you, Cross said firmly. The Silver Star recommendation is still being processed. If that comes through, it creates an interesting contradiction, a soldier simultaneously decorated for valor and reprimanded for the same actions. That might force a reevaluation. Maya managed a slight smile. "Sir, I appreciate everything you and your team have done. But maybe it's time to let this settle. I saved 15 lives. I'm keeping my career. That's a better outcome than I had any right to expect." Cross studied her for a moment, then nodded reluctantly. "You're probably right. But for the record, you're welcome in the SEAL community anytime, anywhere. What you did makes you one of us, regardless of what uniform you wear or what's in your file." 2 days later, Maya was released from restricted status. She spent a week processing paperwork, clearing the base, and preparing for her transition to Fort Moore. On her final evening at Forward Operating Base Sentinel, the entire SEAL team that she'd saved organized an informal gathering, not an official event. Nothing that would appear in any records. Just 15 operators and 1 sniper sharing a meal and finally able to speak freely. They gathered in a secured briefing room, with Rodriguez barbecuing on a portable grill outside and Senior Chief Chun somehow acquiring beer despite the base's alcohol restrictions. The atmosphere was relaxed but emotional. All of them aware this might be their only chance to properly express what had happened on that mountain. Lieutenant Commander Cross stood, raising his beer can in a toast. "To Staff Sergeant Maya Reeves, the ghost who refused to let us die. The sniper who rewrote the rules of engagement. And the soldier who proved that sometimes the right choice and the legal choice aren't the same thing. We owe you our lives. Our families owe you their futures. That's a debt we can never repay, but we'll spend the rest of our careers trying." 15 voices echoed the sentiment, and Maya found herself blinking back tears she'd successfully held at bay for nearly a month. These men warriors she'd watched fight impossible odds. Operators who demonstrated courage and skill beyond anything she'd previously witnessed, were honoring her for making a choice that had nearly destroyed her career. Senior Chief Chun approached her later in the evening, his normally gruff demeanor softened by emotion and possibly by the contraband beer. "Staff Sergeant, I've been doing this job for 22 years. I've worked with the best snipers the military has: Marine Scout snipers, Army Special Forces, SEAL snipers. What you did on that mountain was the finest example of the sniper's art I've ever witnessed. Not just the shooting, the judgment, the prioritization, the ability to manage multiple threats while maintaining fire discipline. That was masterclass work. I just did what needed to be done, Senior Chief." "No, ma'am. You did what most people wouldn't have the courage to do. You threw away your career to save strangers. That's not just skill, that's character. That's the kind of soldier every commander wishes they had and that most organizations don't deserve." As the evening wound down and the team began departing, Rodriguez approached with his wife Nicole and their daughter, Sophia. The 2-year-old Maya had heard about but never met. Nicole's eyes were red-rimmed, and when she spoke, her voice cracked with emotion. "Staff Sergeant Reeves, I don't have words for what you did. Jake told me about the engagement, about how close he came to dying, about how your fire gave the medic time to save him. My daughter still has her father because you refused to follow orders that would have let him die. Thank you doesn't begin to cover it, but it's all I have." She handed Maya a photograph. Rodriguez, Nicole, and Sophia at what appeared to be a beach, all 3 smiling at the camera, healthy and whole and alive. On the back, Nicole had written, "This family exists because of your courage. We will never forget." Maya held the photograph, looking at the little girl who would grow up with her father, and finally understood that regardless of what her official record said, regardless of how her career progressed from here, she'd made a choice that mattered in the most fundamental way possible. 15 people were alive. 15 families were intact. That was worth every consequence, every reprimand, every limitation on her future. That night, alone in her quarters for the final time, Maya placed the photograph in her personal effects alongside her orders for Fort Moore. Tomorrow, she'd begin the next chapter of her career teaching rather than operating. training others rather than engaging herself. But tonight she allowed herself to feel what she'd been suppressing for nearly a month: pride in what she'd accomplished, satisfaction at the lives she'd saved, and peace with the choices that had brought her to this moment. She'd violated orders, faced investigation, accepted consequences that would follow her for years. And she'd do it all again without hesitation, because some decisions were too important to be governed by regulations. Sometimes the rules were wrong. Sometimes disobedience was the most moral choice available, and sometimes one person with courage and a rifle could change everything. Maya arrived at Fort Moore, Georgia, 6 weeks after the engagement in the Hindu Kush. The sprawling training installation was a dramatic contrast to the forward operating bases she'd called home for the past several years: manicured lawns instead of blast walls, administrative buildings instead of prefabricated tactical operation centers, the ordered predictability of a stateside garrison replacing the controlled chaos of combat zones. The sniper school was housed in a modern facility on the eastern edge of the base, equipped with state-of-the-art ranges, tactical simulators, and classroom spaces designed for the kind of advanced instruction that produced the Army's precision marksmen. Maya reported to the commandant, Colonel Richard Vance, a former ranger with extensive sniper experience and a reputation for demanding excellence from his instructors. Vance reviewed her file in silence, his expression neutral as he absorbed the contradictions in her record: exceptional performance ratings, multiple deployment commendations, expert marksmanship qualifications, and now a formal letter of reprimand for violating direct orders during combat operations. Finally he looked up, his gray eyes assessing. "Staff Sergeant Reeves, I've read the classified after-action reports from Operation Righteous Saber. I know what you did. I know what it cost you. And I know why you're here instead of still attached to JSOC. Yes, sir. Your assignment is to serve as lead instructor for our Advanced Tactical Employment Course, the program that trains snipers for attachment to special operations units. You'll be teaching the same operators who might one day find themselves in the exact situation you faced. How do you plan to approach that responsibility?" Maya had spent the past 6 weeks thinking about precisely this question. "Sir, I plan to teach them technical excellence, first marksmanship, fieldcraft, observation skills, all the fundamental competencies that make an effective sniper. But I also plan to teach them tactical judgment, decision-making under pressure, and how to balance mission requirements against real-world constraints." "And the part about disobeying orders? Will that be part of your curriculum?" The question was a test, Maya recognized. Vance needed to know whether she'd become a liability, someone who'd use her platform to undermine discipline and encourage insubordination. "No, sir. I won't teach disobedience. But I will teach critical thinking, how to assess situations, understand commander's intent, recognize when circumstances have changed beyond what was planned, and communicate that information effectively up the chain. I'll teach them that their job is to provide their commanders with accurate information and professional recommendations, then execute whatever orders they receive to the absolute best of their ability. And if the orders are wrong, then they execute them anyway, sir. Unless doing so would result in immediate, irreversible catastrophe, and even then, they better be damn sure they're right and willing to accept the consequences. What I did was an exception, not a model. I don't want these students thinking they can second-guess their commanders routinely." Vance studied her for another moment, then nodded slightly. "Good answer. You start Monday with a class of 42 students, mix of Army Rangers, Special Forces, and candidates for SEAL sniper attachment. They're among the best marksmen the military produces, but they need to learn how to employ those skills in complex tactical environments. Your job is to bridge that gap." The first day of class arrived with the nervous energy Maya remembered from her own sniper training years earlier. 42 students in their mid-20s to early 30s, all carrying the quiet confidence of operators who'd proven themselves in previous assignments, all looking at their new instructor with the barely concealed skepticism that special operations personnel reserved for anyone they hadn't personally vetted in. Combat. Maya stood before them in her instructor uniform, her staff sergeant rank clearly visible, her 5'6" frame dwarfed by most of the male students in the room. She could read their thoughts and their expressions. This woman was supposed to teach them advanced tactics. What could she possibly know that they didn't? She let the skepticism build for a moment, then spoke clearly and without preamble. I'm Staff Sergeant Maya Reeves. I've served 4 combat deployments spanning 11 years, primarily in reconnaissance and sniper roles attached to JSOC elements. 6 weeks ago, I engaged approximately 20 enemy combatants during a 4-hour firefight in the Hindu Kush mountains, disrupted multiple assault attempts on a pinned-down SEAL element, and maintained effective precision fire while simultaneously defending my position against direct attack. 15 special operations personnel are alive because of that engagement. She paused, watching the skepticism begin to transform into interest. I'm also currently serving under a formal letter of reprimand for violating direct orders during that same engagement. My career ceiling is now permanently capped, and I'll never hold another operational assignment. So when I teach you about tactical decision-making, about balancing mission requirements against real-world constraints, about the difference between initiative and insubordination, I'm teaching from experience that nearly cost me everything I've built over 15 years of service. The room was completely silent now. 42 operators giving her their full attention. This course is called Advanced Tactical Employment. Over the next 12 weeks, I'm going to teach you how to be more than just accurate shooters. I'm going to teach you how to read battlefields, prioritize targets, provide fire support that changes tactical dynamics rather than just adding volume. I'm going to teach you how to make judgment calls under pressure, how to communicate effectively with the elements you're supporting, and how to manage the unique psychological challenges of being the lone precision asset, watching other people fight and die. She moved to the whiteboard and began sketching a tactical diagram. But before we get to any of that, we need to establish some foundational principles. First, your job is not to pile up body counts. Your job is to provide tactical effects that enable mission success. Sometimes that means killing high-value targets. Sometimes it means suppressing enemy positions. Sometimes it means and the part about disobeying orders? Will that be part of your curriculum? The question was a test Maya recognized. Vance needed to know whether she'd become a liability, someone who'd use her platform to undermine discipline and encourage insubordination. No, sir. I won't teach disobedience. But I will teach critical thinking, how to assess situations, understand commander's intent, recognize when circumstances have changed beyond what was planned, and communicate that information effectively up the chain. I'll teach them that their job is to provide their commanders with accurate information and professional recommendations, then execute whatever orders they receive to the absolute best of their ability. And if the orders are wrong, then they execute them anyway, sir. Unless doing so would result in immediate, irreversible catastrophe, and even then, they better be damn sure they're right and willing to accept the consequences. What I did was an exception, not a model. I don't want these students thinking they can second-guess their commanders routinely. Vance studied her for another moment, then nodded slightly. Good answer. You start Monday with a class of 42 students mix of Army Rangers, Special Forces, and candidates for SEAL Sniper Attachment. They're among the best marksmen the military produces, but they need to learn how to employ those skills in complex tactical environments. Your job is to bridge that gap. The first day of class arrived with the nervous energy Maya remembered from her own sniper training years earlier. 42 students in their mid-20s to early 30s, all carrying the quiet confidence of operators who'd proven themselves in previous assignments. all looking at their new instructor with the barely concealed skepticism that special operations personnel reserved for anyone they hadn't personally vetted in. Combat. Maya stood before them in her instructor uniform, her staff sergeant rank clearly visible, her 5'6" frame dwarfed by most of the male students in the room. She could read their thoughts and their expressions. This woman was supposed to teach them advanced tactics. What could she possibly know that they didn't? She let the skepticism build for a moment, then spoke clearly and without preamble. I'm Staff Sergeant Maya Reeves. I've served 4 combat deployments spanning 11 years, primarily in reconnaissance and sniper roles attached to JSOC elements. 6 weeks ago, I engaged approximately 20 enemy combatants during a 4-hour firefight in the Hindu Kush mountains, disrupted multiple assault attempts on a pinned-down SEAL element, and maintained effective precision fire while simultaneously defending my position against direct attack. 15 special operations personnel are alive because of that engagement. She paused, watching the skepticism begin to transform into interest. I'm also currently serving under a formal letter of reprimand for violating direct orders during that same engagement. My career ceiling is now permanently capped, and I'll never hold another operational assignment. So when I teach you about tactical decision-making, about balancing mission requirements against real-world constraints, about the difference between initiative and insubordination, I'm teaching from experience that nearly cost me everything I've built over 15 years of service. The room was completely silent now. 42 operators giving her their full attention. This course is called Advanced Tactical Employment. Over the next 12 weeks, I'm going to teach you how to be more than just accurate shooters. I'm going to teach you how to read battlefields, prioritize targets, provide fire support that changes tactical dynamics rather than just adding volume. I'm going to teach you how to make judgment calls under pressure, how to communicate effectively with the elements you're supporting, and how to manage the unique psychological challenges of being the lone precision asset, watching other people fight and die. She moved to the whiteboard and began sketching a tactical diagram. But before we get to any of that, we need to establish some foundational principles. First, your job is not to pile up body counts. Your job is to provide tactical effects that enable mission success. Sometimes that means killing high-value targets. Sometimes it means suppressing enemy positions. Sometimes it means disrupting enemy command and control. You need to understand what effect is required and deliver it precisely. Over the following weeks, Maya developed a teaching methodology that blended technical instruction with tactical philosophy. Her students learned not just how to shoot at extended ranges, but how to analyze terrain, identify key enemy positions, prioritize targets based on threat assessment rather than convenience, and maintain effective fire across sustained engagements. But the most impactful lessons came when she incorporated real-world scenarios, based on actual combat engagements, some from her own experience, others drawn from classified after-action reports she'd been granted access to for instructional purposes. 3 weeks into the course, she presented her students with a scenario directly modeled on Operation Righteous Saber, though she didn't identify it as such initially. 15 friendly forces pinned down by 50-plus enemy fighters. Air support delayed. Ground reinforcement too far away. She returned to the whiteboard. What I will tell you is this: develop your judgment, understand your capabilities, know your limitations, and think deeply about your values before you're in a crisis situation. Because when you're on a mountain watching people die, you won't have time for philosophical reflection. You'll have seconds to decide, and whatever choice you make will define you forever. The conversation evolved over the remaining weeks of the course, with Maya incorporating ethical decision-making alongside tactical instruction. Her students learned not just how to shoot, but how to think, how to assess complex situations, weigh competing priorities, communicate effectively with commanders, and make judgment calls that balanced mission success against rules of engagement. Several months into her teaching assignment, Maya received an unexpected visitor. Lieutenant Commander Cross arrived at Fort Moore, no longer showing signs of his combat injuries, moving with the athletic confidence of a fully recovered SEAL officer. "Staff Sergeant," he greeted her warmly. "I was in the area for a command conference and wanted to check on how you're settling into the teaching role." They walked the grounds of the sniper school as Cross explained the actual purpose of his visit. The Silver Star recommendation was approved. "You're being decorated for exceptional valor in combat. The ceremony will be in 3 weeks at the Pentagon, with the Secretary of the Army presenting. My entire team will be there, we wouldn't miss it." Maya absorbed the information with mixed feelings. Recognition for valor while simultaneously serving under reprimand created an odd contradiction, decorated for actions she'd been punished for. "Sir, I appreciate the recognition, but isn't this going to create awkward questions? How do you get a Silver Star and a letter of reprimand for the same actions?" Cross smiled. "That's exactly the point. The contradiction forces people to confront the complexity of what you did. You violated orders that's documented in your reprimand. You also displayed extraordinary valor and saved 15 lives that's documented in your Silver Star. Both things are true. Living with that tension is uncomfortable, which is exactly why it's important." He paused, his expression turning more serious. "Maya, I've spent the past 3 months talking to senior leaders about your case. The consensus is emerging that while you were technically wrong to disobey orders, you were morally right to save lives. That distinction matters. It creates space for future operators facing similar impossible choices to know that judgment and courage matter, not just blind obedience. I'm not sure I want to be a test case for redefining military discipline, sir. Too late. You already are. The question is whether you embrace that role or try to minimize it." Cross stopped walking and faced her directly. "You changed how Special Operations thinks about sniper support. You proved that semi-automatic precision rifles can provide effects that bolt actions can't match in certain scenarios. You demonstrated that one well-positioned shooter with tactical judgment can change entire battles. Those lessons are being incorporated into doctrine right now because of what you did." Several weeks later, Maya stood in dress uniform at the Pentagon. Surrounded by senior military leadership, Department of Defense officials, and the 15 SEAL operators whose lives she'd saved. The Secretary of the Army read the citation carefully. Worded to praise her exceptional precision fire support in combat, without explicitly mentioning that she'd violated orders to provide it. The Silver Star was pinned to her uniform, joining the other decorations she'd earned across 15 years of service. But the moment that mattered most came afterward, when the SEAL team presented her with a wooden plaque they'd commissioned, an intricate carving of an SR-25 rifle framed by mountain scenery, with a simple inscription, "To SSG Maya Reeves, the guardian angel of Karwat Valley." 15 lives saved by one warrior who valued conscience over compliance. With eternal gratitude, SEAL Team 6, Gold Squadron. Senior Chief Chun stepped forward, his voice rough with emotion. "Ma'am, official medals go in display cases and service records. This is different. This is from us to you, so you always remember that what you did mattered more than any regulation, any career consideration, any bureaucratic consequence. You're one of us now, always." Maya held the plaque, feeling the weight of what it represented, not just recognition, but acceptance into a brotherhood that transcended service branches and unit assignments. She'd sacrificed her career progression to save these men, and they were ensuring she knew that sacrifice was valued. Remembered, honored. The ceremony concluded with photographs, handshakes, and congratulations from officers who'd previously questioned whether she should have been court-martialed. The contradictions of military culture were on full display. She was simultaneously decorated and reprimanded, praised and limited, honored and constrained. But as Maya left the Pentagon with the wooden plaque in her hands and the silver star on her uniform, she felt something she hadn't experienced since making her choice on that mountain. Peace with the decision and all its complicated consequences. She'd broken the rules to save lives. The military had punished her for it while simultaneously decorating her for it. Both responses were valid. Both truths would live in her record forever. And somewhere, 15 families were intact because one staff sergeant had decided that some things mattered more than career, advancement, or regulatory compliance. That was enough. 3 years passed since Maya Reeves violated orders and saved 15 lives in the Karwat Valley. 3 years of teaching advanced sniper tactics at Fort Moore, watching hundreds of students cycle through her courses, and building a reputation as one of the most effective instructors in the Special Operations training pipeline. Her courses had become legendary not just for the technical excellence they demanded, but for the ethical frameworks they developed around tactical decision-making. Under pressure, Maya had been promoted to sergeant, first class despite the letter of reprimand in her file, a rare occurrence that spoke to the respect she'd earned and the value her instruction provided. The promotion would likely be her last, the ceiling she'd accepted when she chose to disobey orders. But it came with increased responsibility and the opportunity to shape an entire generation of military snipers. Her daughter, Emma, was now 11 years old, thriving in the stability of stateside assignment, no longer facing the uncertainty of deployments and the fear that mommy might not come home. They'd built a life in Georgia, small house near the base, a routine of school activities and weekend adventures, the kind of normalcy that military families cherished precisely because it was so often interrupted by operational demands. On a humid Georgia morning in late spring, Maya stood before a new class of 45 students, her largest yet, reflecting the increased demand for precision marksmen in special operations units. The students represented every branch: Army Rangers, Special Forces, Marine Scout Snipers, Air Force Special Tactics, Navy SEAL candidates, all gathered to learn advanced tactical employment from the woman whose combat engagement had become a case study taught throughout the military education system. But today's session would be different. Maya had invited a special guest, and as the students settled into their seats, Lieutenant Commander David Cross entered the classroom, now wearing the rank insignia of a full commander and carrying himself with the quiet authority of a senior SEL officer with multiple combat commands under his belt. Class, this is Commander David Cross, currently assigned to Naval Special Warfare Development Group. 3 years ago, Commander Cross led a SEAL element that walked into a prepared ambush in the Hindu Kush mountains. What happened next is something you've all studied in your tactical decision-making modules. Today, Commander Cross is here to provide his perspective on that engagement. Cross moved to the front of the room, his presence commanding immediate attention. 3 years ago, my team and I should have died in a valley in Afghanistan. We were outnumbered 5-1, taking casualties, running out of ammunition, with no support due to arrive before we were overrun. We fought for over 4 hours, did everything right tactically, and we're still going to lose because the enemy had every advantage and we'd been failed by catastrophic intelligence errors. He paused, scanning the faces of the students. Then Staff Sergeant Reeves, who at the time was 6 kilometers away with orders to observe only, made a decision that violated every protocol, defied explicit commands, and saved all our lives. What I want to talk about today isn't the tactical details of her shooting, which were exceptional. I want to talk about leadership, judgment, and what it means to make decisions when all your options are bad. Over the next 90 minutes, Cross walked the students through the engagement from his perspective, the growing desperation as ammunition dwindled, the difficult triage decisions about which wounded could be moved and which had to fight from where they fell, the calculations about how to make a final stand that would at least cost the enemy heavily. He described hearing the first crack of Maya's SR-25, the confusion about where supporting fire was coming from, the realization that someone unauthorized was engaging on their behalf. When Staff Sergeant Reeves radioed that she was in position to provide fire support, I had to make my own impossible choice, Cross explained. Accept help from someone operating without authorization, potentially implicating myself and my team in her violations, or refuse and maintain regulatory compliance while my men died. It took me about 2 seconds to make that call, and I've never regretted it. He turned to Maya, who stood at the side of the classroom. "Ma'am, would you join me up here?" Maya moved to stand beside Cross as he continued addressing the students. "Here's what I want you to understand about the person teaching you. Staff." Sergeant Reeves could have followed orders, maintained her observation position, and watched 15 Americans die while keeping her career intact. She chose differently. That choice cost her operational assignments, capped her career progression, and resulted in formal reprimand. But it also meant my daughter still has a father. It meant 14 other families remained intact. It meant 15 highly trained warriors remained available for future missions that have since saved countless more lives. Cross pulled a document from his folder. Last month, Staff Sergeant Reeves was nominated for inclusion in the Army Ranger Hall of Fame, an honor rarely bestowed on personnel who aren't Ranger qualified, but whose contributions to special operations are deemed exceptional. The nomination was approved unanimously. She's also being selected to author the new doctrine manual for precision fire support in special operations, essentially codifying the techniques and judgment frameworks she's been teaching here into official military guidance. The students burst into spontaneous applause, a breach of classroom protocol that Maya would normally have corrected, but that Cross allowed to continue for several moments before raising his hand for silence. But beyond the official recognition, beyond the awards and the doctrinal contributions, here's what really matters, Cross continued, his voice taking on a more personal tone. Every one of the 15 men Staff Sergeant Reeves saved has gone on to deploy multiple additional times. Between us, we've conducted over 200 subsequent combat operations. We've rescued hostages, eliminated high-value targets, disrupted terrorist networks, and directly saved dozens of civilian lives. All of that, all those missions, all those outcomes, exists because one staff sergeant made an impossible choice 3 years ago. He turned to face Maya directly. "Ma'am, on behalf of Gold Squadron and every operator whose life your decision protected, I want to present you with something." He pulled out a framed photograph showing all 15 SEAL team members, taken just last week, standing together in dress uniforms. Each man had signed the mat surrounding the photograph with personal messages of gratitude. "This is everyone you saved 3 years later, still serving, still fighting, still making a difference. This exists because of you. These families exist because of you. Every mission we've conducted since that day exists because of you." Cross's voice grew thick with emotion. "You didn't just save 15 lives that day, you saved everything. Those lives have touched and will touch for decades to come. That's the real measure of your decision." Maya accepted the photograph, her own eyes damp as she read the handwritten messages from men she'd watched fight desperately for survival 3 years ago, and who were now thriving in continued service. Rodriguez had written, "Sophia is 4 now and asks about the guardian angel who saved her daddy. Thank you for letting me watch her grow up." Chun had written, 25 years of service and the finest example of a warrior I ever witnessed. Came from someone willing to sacrifice everything for strangers." The classroom had gone silent, students absorbing the weight of what they were witnessing, not just a military decoration or official recognition, but something deeper and more meaningful. The human cost and human benefit of impossible decisions. The ripple effects of moral courage. The difference one person could make when they chose conscience over compliance. After Cross departed, Maya resumed her instruction, but the tone had shifted. The students weren't just learning tactical techniques anymore. They were grappling with the fundamental questions of what it meant to serve, to lead, to make decisions when lives hung in the balance. A Marine sergeant raised his hand during the afternoon session. "Ma'am, you've taught us that following orders is critical to military discipline, but you violated orders to save lives. How do we reconcile those positions? How do we know when the situation justifies disobedience?" Maya had been asked this question hundreds of times over the past 3 years, and her answer had refined itself through repetition and reflection. "Sergeant, here's what I've learned. You don't know. There's no formula, no checklist, no decision matrix that tells you when to obey and when to disobey. What you can do is develop your judgment through training and experience, understand your own values deeply, and prepare yourself mentally for the possibility that someday you might face a choice where all options carry terrible consequences." She moved to the whiteboard and began writing. If you're ever in that position, ask yourself these questions. First, do I have information my commanders don't have that fundamentally changes the situation? Second, is there time to communicate that information and request guidance? Third, what are the likely outcomes of obedience versus disobedience? Fourth, can I live with those outcomes? Fifth, am I prepared to accept full responsibility for my choice? She turned back to face the class. In my case, the answers were yes. I had real-time information about the SEAL team's deteriorating situation that the TOC didn't fully appreciate. No, there wasn't time to debate through channels. The team had minutes before being overrun. Obedience meant 15 deaths. Disobedience meant potential career destruction. I could live with career destruction, but not with watching Americans die when I could save them. And yes, I was prepared to accept responsibility. But here's the critical part, Maya emphasized. I didn't make that decision lightly or casually. I agonized over it. I tried every official channel first. I only violated orders when I'd exhausted every other option, and men were literally dying. That's not a model for routine decision-making. It's an exception for the most extreme circumstances. The semester continued, with Maya's students showing exceptional performance, not just in marksmanship, but in tactical judgment and ethical reasoning. Her teaching methodology had evolved into something unique in military education, combining technical excellence with philosophical depth, producing operators who could shoot with precision and think with sophistication. On the final day of the course, Maya stood before her graduating class, preparing to send 45 newly qualified advanced tactical snipers into the special operations community. She'd done this dozens of times, but it never lost its significance, knowing these students would face real combat, make real decisions, potentially find themselves in impossible situations where their training and judgment would determine whether people lived or died. "Before you leave here," Maya began, "I want to share one final thought. You've spent 12 weeks learning how to employ precision fire in complex tactical environments. You've become technically proficient, tactically sound, and ethically grounded. But the most important lesson isn't about shooting or tactics or even decision-making. It's about understanding why we serve." She gestured to the photograph of the 15 SEALs that now hung prominently in her classroom. "We serve to protect American lives. That's the mission underneath all other missions, the purpose that justifies everything else we do. Rules exist to serve that purpose, not the other way around. When rules enable the mission, follow them absolutely. But if you ever find yourself in a situation where following rules means abandoning the fundamental purpose they're supposed to serve, you have a choice to make. I won't tell you what choice to make. That's between you, your conscience, and your understanding of what honor demands. But I will tell you this: whatever choice you make, own it completely. Don't hide behind orders or regulations or chains of command. Stand behind your decision, accept its consequences, and live with integrity. She paused, scanning the faces of students who'd become more than just learners. They'd become the next generation, carrying forward the lessons written in blood and sacrifice on mountains around the world. Some of you may face impossible situations. Some may have to choose between compliance and conscience. Some may have to decide what matters more, your career or your values. I hope you never face those choices. But if you do, remember, 15 families exist because one person decided that some things are worth more than regulations. Dismissed. The students rose, many approaching to shake her hand, to thank her for instruction that had transformed not just their technical capabilities, but their understanding of what it meant to serve with honor. Maya spent hours that evening talking with individual students, answering final questions, offering guidance that would stay with them through careers that might span decades. As the sun set over Fort Moore and the last student departed, Maya stood alone in her classroom, looking at the wooden plaque from the SEAL team, the Silver Star citation framed on the wall, and the photograph of 15 men whose lives she'd saved and who'd gone on to save countless others. 3 years ago, she'd been a staff sergeant with a spotless record and a promising career. She'd sacrificed that future in approximately 30 seconds of decision-making on a mountain halfway around the world. The cost had been real: capped career progression, permanent reprimand, loss of operational assignments she'd loved. But standing in her classroom, looking at the evidence of lives saved and students taught and doctrine changed, Maya couldn't identify a single thing she'd do differently. The price had been high, but the value received in lives preserved, in principles honored, in conscience maintained far exceeded what she'd paid. Her phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Mom, when are you coming home?" "I made dinner." Maya smiled, gathering her materials and preparing to leave. She'd made her impossible choice 3 years ago, had lived with its consequences, and had built something meaningful from the wreckage of her original career plans. 15 families were intact. Hundreds of students were better trained. Military doctrine had evolved. And one 11-year-old girl had a mother who demonstrated through action, not just words, that some principles mattered more than personal advancement. As Maya drove home through the Georgia evening, she thought about Rodriguez's daughter Sophia, now 4 years old, growing up with a father because her mother had chosen to disobey. She thought about Chun's continued service, now mentoring the next generation of SEAL operators. She thought about Cross, commanding missions that saved lives and disrupted threats. She thought about every deployment those 15 men had conducted since that day. Every mission accomplished, every life saved, every terrorist network disrupted, every hostage rescued, all of it possible because she'd made one choice on one day when everything hung in the balance. The ripple effects of that decision would continue long after she retired, long after the specifics of the engagement faded from institutional memory. They'd continue in the students she taught, the doctrine she helped write, the example she set about moral courage and the willingness to sacrifice personal advancement for principles that transcended career considerations. Maya Reeves had violated orders, saved 15 lives, accepted the consequences, and built a legacy that would outlast any single combat engagement. She'd proven that sometimes the right choice and the legal choice diverged, and that having the courage to act on conscience rather than compliance defined what it truly meant to serve with honor. 3 years later, looking at the life she'd built from that impossible decision, Maya understood that she'd made the only choice she could live with. And that understanding, that peace with sacrifice made for the right reasons, was worth more than any promotion, any assignment, any career trajectory that required abandoning the values that made service meaningful. She pulled into her driveway, where Emma waited with dinner and stories about her day. And Maya realized that she'd come home not just from work, but from a journey that had tested everything she believed about duty, honor, and what it meant to serve something larger than herself. She'd passed that test. And 15 families, along with everyone those families would touch for generations, were the proof that impossible choices sometimes produced outcomes worth any price. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.